G'day Noblars, AOS Coach here, and we are talking all things Ogor Mawtribes. You got yourself a new set of rules, you've got a new unit, you've got a new terrain feature, and we're going to talk a little Ogres here and talk about where you are in the current meta, what do we like with our picks, how are we building our lists in Generals Handbook 2023 with our Primal Magic dice, your new Gorgers, are we building around it? A lot of things happening in the ogre world, and I am joined by the head butcher himself, the ambassador of the meat dimensions. We have Carson Whitlock, the top performing Ogor Mawtribe player according to the ITC. You are highly ranked on the Woehammer stats as well as ITC player rankings with gut busting performances like the first at Kipper's Melee. You did 6th at the GW Open in Tacoma, as well as you came 4th at the Sparkle Death Party. And for anyone who might recognize that glorious moustache, not only is he chopping down trees in the forest, he's also, you've probably seen him as a reoccurring guest on Saga of Dice. So they stream on every Wednesday and do battle reports. Rob does incredible work out there, and you're a reoccurring guest. But Carson, g'day, welcome. And for the folks who don't know who you are, do you want to introduce yourself and how you got into Ogres?
Yeah, absolutely. Also, first of all, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be on the show and talk endlessly about Ogres for about 2 hours, which nobody has ever allowed me to do before. So thank you for that, allowing me to have a platform. But yeah, I'm Carson. I really only started being competitive in AOS for this year. I think the first tournament I went to was back in March, which was just like a little RTT, which was a lot of fun. I got into Ogres probably like 4 years ago. Just on a whim. I used to play 40k, and my brother was just like, "Hey, we're gonna play iOS now," and he picked up some Seraphon, and I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm gonna pick up Beastclaw Raiders because that's like big monsters, and I love big monster trucks, and I'm sure all of the Ogre players love them too." And then I kind of like was in and out of the hobby for a bit, and I actually ended up working on a Age of Sigmar video game, which kind of got me back into it, Stormground. So that's why I'm here.
I did not know that. That is very, very cool. I actually just pre-ordered the Realms of Ruin yesterday, so it drops while we're in Atlanta. So I paid for it. So as soon as I get back to hotel Wi-Fi, I can download it back for my flight back home. So I'm pretty excited to see the Age of Sigmar world building in video game form, and like Total War's been awesome. So I know this is a completely different side stream, but I'm super glad that we're seeing more and more AOS games, because I look over the fence in 40k and they have so many great games, and I get jealous. I'm like, okay, give me Bolt Gun, but give me like a Stormcast Hammer. Like, I'm just going around smashing things as a liberator. Like I'm down for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Realms of Ruin looks really cool. I really like what they're doing with the RTS genre. Like they're focusing a little bit more on making it accessible to consoles, which is really nice too. Like you can't just have a PC game nowadays, unfortunately. When it's big enough, you got to have people from all platforms. So it's good that they're accommodating that.
Well, it's funny you say that, actually, because I just bought myself a Stream Deck for this flight. So I've been playing little handheld, like with Stream. It's incredible. Like I can't believe I didn't buy it sooner. But speaking of buying things sooner, I should probably mention Games Workshop did send me this book in advance. So thank you, Games Workshop. Also, if you are thinking about buying your hobby, like your Long Hunt, your Ogre Box, your Gorges and stuff like that, you can buy it through the affiliate links down below. Warpfire Minis in the USA and Element Games in the UK, who are our affiliate partner of mine. So check out the links, help the channel. All is appreciated. But this is an interesting book. Ogre players, I don't know if you particularly need this book. I mean, the lore is fun. It's always interesting, but it's not like it's a complete revamp of your faction. And we'll go through the rules as the Gorges. We'll go through the Mawpit, which are also on Warhammer Community, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I remember correctly.
I think so.
So let's start the Generals Handbook 2023 first. Let's warm into this a little. Let's start the pot, put the logs under the fire of the Mawpit, and let's start the cooking. How are you finding them so far? It's been 4 months now, 4 to 5 months. I can't remember exactly when Generals Handbook 2023 dropped. Ogres are definitely not a faction that people are talking about. And when people do talk about them, it's often the other side, which is, your Frost Lords, your Beastclaw Raider side. You know, we've got different battle tactics, especially for people turn 1, they seem a little harder. How are you just finding ogres in general and their level to compete in the current season?
Yeah, I think ogres are in a really interesting spot right now because we kind of see before the General's Handbook was actually released and we saw all the rules, we were like, okay, Magic Dom is gonna absolutely dominate the meta. You're gonna see a lot of Zinch, a lot of Seraphon, people that can really make the most out of like Primal Dice and whatnot and shutting other people down. But it's almost kind of been like you have that for sure, but you also have armies that can completely shut down any sort of magical armies. Like you have Khorne, which is going to be actively benefiting from having spells targeting them sometimes. You have Null Myriad, which is going to be just straight up ignoring most of the offensive output. But Ogres doesn't really care one way or the other. Like it doesn't counter any magic army, but it also doesn't particularly care if its magic goes off. So a lot of the spells that ogres have is like they'll be very beneficial, they'll be utility, but they won't be directly like targeting another unit of your opponent's. So it's like if it goes off, great. If not, not a big deal. So I found that ogres are in an interesting spot where you can kind of build like a utility army that kind of deals with everyone pretty well, but doesn't directly counter anyone and doesn't really directly get countered by anyone either. So yeah.
Seems really much like if you're a destruction player in general, you know, when I play with my sons, it's very similar. Like, okay, you get spells off. Like, yeah, I've got some primal dice. I'll put them against that one critical spell or 2 critical spells that I don't want, but I can't battle you in the magical game. And, you know, Ogres has a lot of prayers as well. It's interesting as well because, you know, I know when the current season kind of started and you could teleport your little blizzard wizards, things like your Frostlord and Stonehorns, hated that. I could delete a Frostlord and Stonehorn with less than 100 points with a blizzard wizard who could teleport. That's changed. So all of a sudden, the landscape for us, especially as Ogres players, it feels like it's gotten fairer. You know, you're less likely to loot those big trade pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. But to be honest, in the tournaments that I've been to, I saw less of that. People like teleporting a wizard just outside me, just outside of like range to, or sorry, just inside range to blow up a Stonehorn, and more so people just kind of hiding a blizzard piece inside their castle, so that it's like they're not going to come to me, which means that I don't have anything to like counterattack. But I also can't just absolutely smash into them because chances are I'm not going to hit that blizzard wizard, and next turn it's just going to absolutely blow something up. So that part kind of hasn't changed, though I am glad to not be worried about a teleporting wizard. Like it does ease my mind a little bit, but it's still something to be worried about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. As you are, and people are finding it, you know, primal magic dice becoming more defensive, you know, trying to unbind, you know, not many people are building around the blizzard, although it is still a great spell, but more people are trying to stop you from casting that critical buff spell. You are also seeing a bunch of things, right? And it's interesting, actually. I've been doing this series for a while now, talking to people as I revisit the General's Handbook. And what really stood out to me was that this particular season, you've had no points changes. You have no rule changes. You know, every other faction has had a rule either added or manipulated or a battle tactic added, but ogres are pretty untouched. So that might mean a good thing. It's not like, you know, you're kind of balanced, like you're not crazy too good and you need to be kind of brought down a peg. And you're also not at the bottom of the rung where you need a bit of help to compete. You're in this nice little middle ground. Is that kind of your experience so far in the last couple of months?
It is, and it's been a cause of great anxiety for me because my list sits exactly at 2,000 points. So every time a battle scroll is announced, I'm just like, please don't add 10 points to my list. It'll ruin everything because like every unit in my list is extremely necessary to make it work. So, but yeah, like for the most part, that's been the case. We started off the season with a battle scroll that gave us a lot of buffs. Like Gluttons and Iron Guts went down in points a lot. Frost Lord went up by 10 points, I think, or 20 points. So it was enough for me to actually fit a unit of Noblars into my list, which is like, it's been invaluable. So yeah.
Speaking of Noblars, do you have any favorite units that have been doing well for you right now, whether it's scoring battle tactics, and we will get to battle tactics so we can kind of get into the weeds a little further, but just any particular units that have really started to resonate this particular season, either something that's always been good that is still good today, or a unit that is like, you know what, you're a bit of a sleeper, like let's say the Blood Pelt Hunter. Like, people didn't really use it, but now because of X, they've just tenfolded their value.
Yeah, I think the Firebelly has been like a sleeper unit that has just really amplified my army. Like I literally take him for one spell, which is a 12-inch bubble of friendly units within it. Holy or -1 to hit, which is just extremely good for ogres because we kind of struggle with saves. We have a lot of wounds, but the less damage we can take, the better. And there's been times where that Firebelly's like won me games. I'll have a Stonehorn sitting out front, like ready for my opponent to charge it with everything, but it's like -1 to wound, has +1 to save from Mystic Shield. Maybe I Finest Houred it and it's -1 to hit, and then someone puts like 9 Gore Gruntas into it and it does like 2 damage. I'm like, cool, sounds good. I'm going to counter strike now. Like it's been amazing.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that because that was going to be my pick. Like even the Fire Breath as well, being able to just do a bunch of horde clearing. I mean, obviously it's capped to a maximum of 10 damage, but hordes have definitely returned to the table. Getting volume of attacks is something that can be challenging at times for ogre players, depending on how you build. But I'm glad you call that out because it's a wizard. It does neat things. It plays perfectly into the season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other top picks? Should I be building my army around Frostlord on Stonehorns, or are you finding that the Gutbuster side is as competitive? Like where are you at?
I mean, if you give me enough time, I'm just going to go down my whole list. But yeah, you definitely want a Frostlord on Stonehorn in every army you take. I have strong feelings about Stonehorns, where I think 1 is amazing. It's one of the best units in the game. But if you take 5, it's like very diminishing returns. It's like if you go to Costco and get a hot dog, that hot dog is going to be great. But if you eat 5 hot dogs in a row, you're probably going to kind of hate yourself after a little bit. So yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. I've never had a Costco hot dog, but I can resonate in some other area. Like
Yeah,
just have one.
exactly. But Frostlords you can stack a lot of buffs on them, but by default, they're a little bit swingy. Like Rock Hard Horns are 4s to hit, which is really rough, especially if you're like charging into a Bloodthirster, anything that's -1 to hit or wound or something like that. Like you can end up doing really low damage. But if you have that Frostlord that suddenly has Mystic Shield, maybe it has Molten Entrails for more damage, maybe it has Hoarfrost to make Rock Hard Horn sitting on like 1s or 2s or something, the more buffs you can stack on it, the better. And you can only do each monstrous action once. And the Stonehorn is there to basically surf over your enemy units and pick off something valuable in the back line. And because you can really only do that with 1 Stonehorn, if you have 5, you kind of have like 4 out of position or like not in the best spot. And they're actually not great for horde clearing, in my opinion, because they can be so swingy.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think even if I was purely Gutbusters, having a Stonehorn in my list, that monstrous rampage, and we will get to it. If you don't know what we're talking about here, it's such a good one. Like if I think about my Gits and my Squig being able to jump in, fight, and then yeet out for another day, and I think that's good. That particular monstrous rampage is just turns up to 11. It's horrifying for probably right now for castle armies too, where people are probably building, as you said, more castles, having more wizards protected, being able to jump over those screens if the space is appropriate, and get into that juicy center, and you'll collapse an opponent.
Yeah, absolutely. The amount of times I've heard Stonehorn-sized hole in my games at tournaments is like, I'd be a millionaire if I had a nickel each time. Like it's been a lot because people are like, okay, well, I'm gonna move these models in this way, but there's a Stonehorn-sized hole right here, so I have to shift this guy this way slightly, and then you end up this like super spread out, weird-looking castle that they don't really want to do because they know you can jump over it.
Which you can take advantage of because now they're spread out, which means it allows you to do a lot of cool things. Any other units that you would call out, or do you want to get into maybe the War Scrolls, the Gorger?
Let's get into the War Scrolls because I'll talk about my list at the end of the stream, presumably. So
we will definitely always talk lists, but we got to get through the rules first to understand the context of the list, because as you've also said, you're 10 points away from having to rewrite your list. So should that happen, what's the theory, and how do we actually build a good ogres list? But let's talk rules. Let's talk the first new War Scroll. So there is one new unit. one new terrain feature, and you have these armies of renown. So that's the 3 things coming to ogres. If you don't want to play them, cool, keep doing what you're doing. We'll talk about your book, but you do have some extra things. So this war scroll is for the Gorger Mawpack. We can only assume, and the fair assumption would be, is that this will replace the Gorger's war scroll. So currently you pay 1 Gorger for 80 points. You're now getting 5 for 220 points. It is a completely different war scroll. And as you can see here, movement of 6, save of 6, bravery of 8, and wounds of 5. So it's actually gone down slightly at 1 wound, but you probably get more wounds overall because you're getting 5 for 220.
Yeah.
It has 1 melee attack, where previously it used to have 2 profiles, but the quality is probably better. Look, I'll leave it to you, Carson. Like, what are your thoughts on the current war scroll? I assume because it's on Warcom, everyone's had a look at this particular point.
Yeah, this is an interesting war scroll. I think the first thing that people are probably going to do is compare this to like the most basic ogre unit, which is gluttons, and you'll see like, okay, it's got 1 more save, 1 more wound. You're basically getting 25 wounds on a 6-up save instead of 24 wounds on a 5-up save, which is like not a great trade-off so far. This unit can deep strike, which is really good. Previously, or I guess the only things that can do that in ogres right now, I believe, are Frost Sabers, the Icebrow Hunter, and the existing Gorger. And no one really takes any of those because they don't have any benefit aside from that, unfortunately. The big thing here is the Agonizing Roar, which is basically anytime something receives a command within 12 inches of this unit, or of a Cave Howler specifically, on a 5-up, they just don't hear it, which can be pretty devastating for some armies. One that comes to mind is like KO. If you were to just like set this up outside of 9 of like a bunch of KO boats and didn't give them enough room to actually escape, that would be pretty bad if they suddenly just can't fly high for a turn, because that's what they rely on a lot of the time. But I think that in comparison to a glutton, like defensively and offensively, it's much worse. Just because with a glutton, you can give them paired ogre clubs and blunt blades, and the attack profile is actually the exact same. It's 3/3s -1/2 damage, whereas these guys have 3 attacks instead of 4, which is a little rough. But I think there's some play here. They're 20 points less than a unit of gluttons. They don't get +1 to charge, which is kind of rough. Almost everything in ogres does. Like gluttons, iron guts, the frost lord gives an aura of it. Like it's pretty prevalent. So for these guys not to have it, it's a little tough. So you can't really rely on dropping them in and then charging in either. And also another issue is that these guys don't necessarily unlock another battle tactic for you unless you do nothing with them for a turn. Because one thing to keep in mind about Surround and Destroy is that you have to pick a unit that's already on the battlefield to be touching a board edge, whereas these guys are going to be coming in from Deep Strike. So you could drop them in and then do nothing with them for a turn, but as we'll see later, that's kind of never what you want to do with ogres. Like if they're not actively trying to kill something or currently killing something, then they're kind of just wasting time. And with how squishy they are, they're really easy to pick off if you do something like that. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but it's complicated is my final answer probably.
No, it's a good thinking approach, because there's multiple layers here. So let's start off at the absolute fundamental. Is this a good war scroll? And you look at it, and the attacks are quality. You're hitting 3s, wounding 3s, Ren 1, 2 damage, pretty consistent. 5 damage, move 6. Okay, that's pretty good. You get 5 models, so you're getting 25 wounds for 200 points. That's fair. Interesting rule. You got the antagonizing roar, being able to shut down commands within 12, within on a 5-up. That's a good rule. As you said, you can deep strike. Very good. Then you compare the Gorger Mawpack to the General Gorger. There's obviously pros and cons. The General Gorger was just 1 model, so it didn't mean you had to commit as much of your force to the Gorger. And for some people, they might have really liked the Gruesome Devourers, which was just an automatic, can't receive Inspiring Presence or Rally, no dice roll. So for some people, they'll go, I really miss the guarantee of Inspiring Presence, Rally shutdown. For others, they'll go, I really like the ability to be able to stop all out attack, all out defense, and other ones because it's a bit more open.
Yeah. One, I guess, caveat with the old ability though is that they had to be in combat in order to shut those things off, and because it was so, I think it was 6 wounds on a 6-up save. That's
They
extremely easy.
were, yeah, they were 6 wounds, 6 up save, and you had to be eating, and the enemy had to be within 9 inches.
Yeah. So that's a lot of stuff. So I guess one thing that you could do is charge it into a screen, which you know is not going to have a lot of offensive output, and that could be useful for sure. But it's difficult to actually satisfy that, unfortunately, because even a screen can squeak through 6 wounds if it spikes, right? You never know what can happen. Whereas I think with this one, it's a little bit more reliable on the 5+. And there's another thing that's kind of beneficial too, is that because it's all commands, if you do charge with this unit, there's a 1/3 chance that you could ignore like an Unleash Hell, for instance, which could be really devastating for some armies. Like in new cities as it's coming up, I'm sure they're going to be wanting to do that all the time. And if you have a 1/3 chance of just shutting that off, then that's huge, right? So yeah, but in
Yeah, no,
general, go ahead. Sorry.
no. I was just going to say, like, that's a really good point. And then the last part that I was going to mention, which ties into what you said, was it's a good war scroll, no doubt about it. But is it better than keeping with something within the Gutbusters? And that's because it's now not at 80 points. Oh, my list is 1900. I can afford a Gorger. Now it's 220. It's the same challenge that Ard Boys have in Auric Warclans, where it's like it's now a commitment of 220 points. This could be something else. This could be the Underworld's Warband. This could be almost two fire bellies. These could be my Antorian Acolyte battalion in having two Blizzard Wizards.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely more experimentation to be done. Like I haven't actually gotten to play a game with these guys yet. I will be playing one tomorrow, so I'll report back. But it's gonna be interesting to see what happens. And there's other things to consider too. Like in my list specifically, I would probably be trading this out for a unit of Gluttons, which frees up 20 points in my list. Which, as I said before, I'm exactly at 2,000. So all of a sudden now I have a chance at a triumph, which is pretty nice. Whereas I never had that previously. So it's kind of getting me two of those benefits. And I also view it as like security. So if my list does end up going up by 10 points in the next battle scroll, it's a very easy choice for me to be like, okay, I can either have no Gluttons at all, or I can trade one unit of Gluttons for a unit of Gorgers and then keep the same list and be 10 points under instead. Um, so there's definitely benefits there, but just more experimentation to be done.
Let's assume that you were going to run a list with Gorges. Would you run multiple units? And if you were going to take multiple units, would you just run them as like a block of 10 or 2 blocks of 5?
So me personally, I tend not to like drastically change my list very often. So probably what I would do is I would start by adding one unit, seeing how it performs, and then maybe continuing on past that. But if someone did want to run a whole bunch of Gorgers, I would probably not run them in group blocks of 10. Just because more likely than not, you're probably going to run these guys in Meat Fist. And Meat Fist definitely heavily like favors MSU units. You want to have multiple units that are going to be the source of trampling charge rolls rather than like one big block of 10. And another reason is that even though these guys have pretty good bravery of 8, a unit of 5 effectively just means that it's ignoring bravery until it's dead on 8 bravery because they have +2 bravery in combat. So yeah, I would probably do them multiple groups of 5 in that case.
Yeah, I agree. I would start off with one. I don't know if there's enough synergy for me that I'd want to take multiple Mawpacks. If I was going to take 440 points worth of Gorges, maybe I'm an absolute fiend and I love these models. I think to your point, I would also take them in 2 units of 5 because having 2 units to deep strike is a much better approach than having a big block of 10 and trying to find the board space where you can appropriately come out from an ambush and not be screened out.
Yeah. And the nice thing about having 2 units is that all of a sudden now you have 2 12-inch bubbles of potentially ignoring your opponent's commands too. So it just makes it more tricky for your opponent to navigate.
Yeah, if this was like the older season where because these are on large bases as well, like, if you take a unit of 10, you're not going to get all of those into combat. So having 2 units of 5 just gives you way more flexibility if you were going to go down that route.
Yeah. And speaking of the old season, the change from 5 to 6 for coherency. That doesn't really affect these guys much, but that's another thing to consider too, is that if you're running a block of 10 of these guys, all of a sudden you have to run them in coherency instead of just in a big string of 5 in a row.
So overall, would you say you like this unit, or is it one that you won't be using for a while? Like where do you stand? Like, you know, give the ogre players some guidance on what they do with their gorges right now.
I actually really like this unit, just because ogres are a very honest army, where it's just like, here's my war scroll, I'm going to run at you, and you're going to see exactly what's going to happen if I manage to get in combat with you. But with these guys, it adds a little bit of tech to the list, where it's like, okay, now I can deep strike something. Now I can potentially shut off some things of yours. Maybe I can block you from going a certain area. Like I could see people playing this in a way where you drop your quarters outside of 9 and then just intentionally don't charge, so that all of a sudden you have a giant block of wounds that your opponent has to move through, so they can't get to the rest of your army where your actual hammers are. So there's a lot of play here, and I also like that they're not so good that you have to take them now, which is, I know that can happen sometimes, and it's nice to not have an obligation, and they're not so bad that you would never take them. So there's a lot of play there.
Yeah, no, you're right. They're quite middle. Like they're not crazy good, but they're also not bad. Like they sit in this middle, and it depends on, do you need this tech? Do you find yourself requiring ambush? Do you find you need certain things like this consistent profile? You need, you know, a unit with a high amount of wounds, like whatever that might be. It's a decent utility piece. I guess my only other question before we move to the Mawpit, which I'm really excited to talk to you about, as soon as I saw the war scroll about the monstrous rampage, it was so hard not to tell anybody until it was officially released. I looked at it and I like lost my mind. But the last question I've got about the ogre, the Gorger Mawpack, is you obviously have a really strong background, especially in the Gutbuster side, but we haven't really talked a lot about the other side, the Beastclaw Raider side. Imagine you were playing more of a, you know, Stonehorn, Thunder Tusk, you know, Beast Rider type build. Do you see value in using the Gorgers because you're not requiring as much synergy? They aren't battle line options, unfortunately, so you're not going to be able to, you know, find some cheaper points and unlock a battle line. What's your thoughts on Beastclaw Raider side using Gorgers?
I probably wouldn't. One thing that someone might think is like, okay, I can drop the Gorgers behind and prevent a redeploy for my Stonehorns or something, but they have to come in at the end of the movement phase, unfortunately, so that doesn't quite work. Another issue is that you already are not having issues whatsoever reaching your opponent with Beastclaw Raiders, because you have 14-inch move across the board. If you have multiple Stonehorns, you could have like potentially +2 to charge even, or, you know, you're not having a problem getting into combat or getting to your opponent. And I think that's kind of what this War Scroll solves for Gutbusters, is that kind of like slow-ish movement across the board. So I would not.
Actually, I lied to you. I've got a final question. I do.
Okay.
I just thought about this because you did mention the Icebrow Hunter, and maybe I'm already taking the Icebrow Hunter with my kitty cats for this particular reason, for ambushing, to challenge back objectives, to sneak on and steal objectives, or, you know, get into a juicy castle center, whatever I might be using a Frost Saber Icebrow Hunter combination for. Would you trade that combination for a unit of Gorges? It works out to be 20 points more expensive to take the Gorges, being that Frost Sabers at 80, Icebrow Hunters 120, so it's 200 versus 220.
Yeah, I would definitely make that trade. 20 points is not a huge amount, and also the offensive output is going to be far more with Gorgers. And then in addition, you also have the tech piece of the potentially shutting off commands too. Whereas, like, unfortunately, Frost Sabers, like, they can get into combat, but they're not particularly slappy, and then they'll fall over if they're coughed at. Like, there's not a lot of staying power. And granted, there's not a lot of staying power here either, but at least it's 25 wounds, right?
Yeah, anyone who's ever run an Icebrow Hunter with Yetis, sorry, Frost Sabers, it's annoying, and it'll steal an objective for a turn, and maybe it'll soak up an Unleashed Hell. It'll be annoying. I can't say I've ever been really worried about a threat of ambush from them.
Yeah.
But Gorges, I absolutely would, especially if I've got like a wizard castle sitting at the back, my forces move forward. that this concerns me a lot more. So I would probably agree with you at this particular point too. But it's 2 units versus 1, but you're getting more wounds in a unit.
2 units versus 1 can be a detriment sometimes too. Like if you're intending to run a battle regiment, like that could be the difference between you being 1 or 2 drops. So
bingo. Or having 2 units actually might be the difference between fulfilling a secondary battalion. So pros and cons.
that's
Pros
true.
and cons. Alrighty. Next is the Mawpit. So for the folks at home, the Mawpit is a terrain feature available for the Ogor Mawtribes. Do I get the Mawpit and the Mawpot? The answer is no. You must choose which one you're taking, and you list it on your army list. So really thinking about this, especially if you're going to tournaments, is going to be critical. So Carson, what's your thoughts on the Mawpit so far? There's some really interesting rules, especially when you start looking at the head butcher rule and the synergy with with having a butcher in your list, as well as my personal favorite rule, it fights back.
Yeah, this is a really cool war scroll. I think that the short answer in the beginning is going to be if you're already running Beast Claw Raiders, you probably shouldn't bring this. But if you're already running Gutbusters, you probably should bring this. And the reason for that is because every charge phase, this could potentially hurt you, right? The player whose turn is taking place must roll a dice for each unit in their army that is within 12 of the terrain feature and 12 of enemy units. Chances are, and also there's one exclusion, which is that if it's a Gutbuster unit, it doesn't have any effect. So if you're running all Stonehorns, this ability is unfortunately going to trigger for basically everything in your army, so you could just potentially be hurting yourself, which is not great. And the other unfortunate thing is because when you're running all Stonehorns, you want to be way over the board in your opponent's face. So there's a chance that the Mawpit is only in range of your Stonehorns, but not in range of your opponents. So it can actually be like an active liability in a Beast Claw Raiders list. However, if you're running Underguts, that's like a heavy shooting castle list or something like that, this is amazing because you want people to be close to you and taking damage for being close to you. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that the abilities that it has are pretty cool. It's effectively saying like you can't get close to ogres without being in combat with ogres, which is what ogres really want. They love being in combat with people because they love slapping people and eating them. But you know, it kind of gives your opponent a dilemma. Like maybe they want to play for a double turn, but they don't want to get too close because they could potentially get hurt quite a bit by this. The head butcher ability, I'm a little bit conflicted about, just because it's probably not going to really do anything to a lot of armies, especially if you're going against like OBR, who most of the time like the minimum wound count is going to be like 3. Then it's just literally impossible for that ability to do anything against them. And just as a recap, that's in your hero phase, if you have a butcher inside of this garrisoning it, you pick a unit within 18 inches, roll a d6. If it's more than twice that enemy unit's wound characteristic, then one model is slain. So if you have anything two or less wounds, then it's possible to slay something, but otherwise it's not, which kind of sucks. But yeah. Again, a long-winded response. I'm probably going to be experimenting with using this a little bit too, but I've got 2 units in my army that are going to get hurt by this, which are the Firebelly, which unfortunately is not Gutbusters, and the Stonehorn, which is Beast Claw Raiders.
So if I think about what you've said so far, as a Beast Claw Raider player, I'm definitely reconsidering how I use this. Now, do I not take the Mawpit? No. But I guess the challenges is that you're likely moving forward, so you're going to be out of range because it is a 12-inch range. I mean, the head butcher rule is an 18 rule. The throat of Gur is a 12-inch rule. So thinking about the battle plans and thinking about where the fights go, often you may be outside of those ranges. And because it is Gutbuster immunity only, there's a likelihood you're going to hurt yourself. So thinking about how you maximize this is going to be a real interesting thought. And are you even taking a butcher in that particular build in the first place? You may find you're currently not. So do you want to add a butcher tax for the sake of using the head butcher rule? In the ogre side, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
And then from the ogre side, you're definitely seeing some real value from this.
Yeah, absolutely. There is one key difference as well, which is that the Mawpot has to be set up wholly within your territory, whereas this has to be set up wholly outside of enemy territory. So in any map that has no man's land, this could be pretty big. Like if you're playing Geomantic Pulse and there's a big 22-inch gap in the center where you can place this anywhere. You could basically place it just outside of your opponent's territory, and it actually messes with them pretty bad. And it also means that it's going to be like hurting them as you get closer to them with your army. So that's something to consider too, whereas the Mawpit has to stay way, way back. Yeah.
No, that's an excellent call out. I was going to go to that one as well as It Fights Back. So
Yes.
really good call out, because you're right. You know, some battle plans where there is no man's land, it's just your territory, my territory. So you just bring it as far forward as possible. And the segue to that is there's a risk. You put it close to your opponent's army and they're like, I need to get rid of this ASAP. Then we have the rule, It Fights Back. And I'm going to read this out because I enjoy it so much. You might not have noticed, I enjoy this so much. If the terrain feature is picked to be smashed to rubble, a monstrous rampage, and that monstrous rampage is unsuccessful, the monster that carried out the monstrous rampage will suffer 3d6 mortal wounds. The smash to rubble monstrous rampage is unsuccessful if it was not 3+. So there is a 1 in 3 chance that you will be taking 3d6 mortal wounds as a monster trying to smash this free terrain piece to rubble.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it kind of, as you said, builds on what I was saying before really well too, where it's like if you put this really close to your opponent and like, you know what, I'm going to try and get rid of this, there's a 1/3 chance that it just absolutely spikes the monster that tries to step on it, which is, that would be enough for me not to try and do that, to be honest. If I was like, like taking some chip mortal wounds once in a while, or potentially taking 3d6 mortal wounds on a monster, which is usually pretty valuable.
And a lot of people aren't running a lot of monsters these days, and you might see 1, mostly 2 in an average list. I'm paying probably a premium. I'm paying 300 to 500 points for that monster. Can I afford to take 3d6 mortal wounds? And what happens if we roll that 1 in 3 chance where my Neferata, my Mega Gargant, my Bloodthirster, my whatever monster cops 3d6 mortal wounds? I don't know, as a tournament player, that's worth the risk. I would rather just try to avoid it. I might split out my force, or just accept, as you said, the chip mortal wounds, because it's better than taking potentially 3d6 mortal wounds and losing maybe my general, a critical monster. It's not worth it.
Yep, absolutely.
Obviously there's exceptions. Like I've got a little 100 to 150 point monster. I've got like in my Cities of Sigmar, I've got, I don't know, a War Hydra. Cool, I can afford to go do that. But in most cases, it's a monster hero that I'd rather just keep on the board.
Yeah. The nice thing is, though, is that even if that is the case, you're going to get 1 turn of value out of this anyway, because the monstrous action has to be at the end of the charge phase, whereas this ability procs at the beginning. So like your opponent could actively try and avoid the effects of it for 1 charge phase and then stomp it, but you're still getting some value in that case because it's causing your opponent to do something different that they otherwise wouldn't do.
It's a psychological threat as well. That's why I enjoy this the most. Is it's only a 33% chance that you will take 3d6 mortal wounds, but it's the threat of it that it will put people off. And as soon as they hear that rule, they will play differently. The way they traditionally move up the board, they're going to try to split the board and almost do what people do with Gotrek, where they try to avoid and create this 14-inch bubble, just trying to stay away from Gotrek. You might find that, and you might find people giving up particular objectives because they can't afford that unit, especially in the later game, to take those chip mortal wounds, because it'll force battle shock. It will mean that they won't have bodies on the objective because they'll be dying from mortals. There'll be all these little flow-on effects because of the abilities and the potential of the abilities.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I really think this is a good war scroll, just because it's cool. Like you said, like it's got some just flat out really awesome effects. And it's the same thing as the Gorgers, where it's like, it's not so good that, oh, I'm never taking the Mawpit anymore, but it's also not so bad that you would never take it. So there's a choice to make.
All right, so if I'm going to a tournament, I'm going to the championships. I'm going to play my ogres. Am I taking the Mawpit or am I taking the Mawpot? I guess pros and cons on the choice.
It really depends on your list. So as I said at the beginning, like if you're running Beast Collar Raiders, like I probably just wouldn't take it. If you're running Underguts, I would definitely take it. And if you're running Meat Fist, which is what I do, you got to do your own research, unfortunately, for what specifically works with your list. Like if you have a bunch of units in your list that are not Gutbusters, then it's going to be pretty painful for you. But if you don't, then yeah, I would absolutely take it. I also think there's something to be said too about, like you said, the psychological effect. If you know that you're going to be able to do that a lot, making your opponent, make bad decisions because of this terrain piece, it's definitely a good thing to bring. So yeah, I would probably say I'm at like a 60-40 split in favor of bringing the Mawpit at the moment, which is not super helpful for most, but yeah.
Yeah, if I was an ogre player, which I'm not, I'm being completely honest, I'm a Gargant and I'm a Gitz player. But if I was a ogre player, I think I would tend to play with the Mawpit because I like my Gutbusters more than my Beastclaw Raiders. And you mentioned earlier something that I would like to do, and that is the combination with the Iron Guts, maybe even the Iron Blaster, where I might have one or two Iron Blasters at the back. I would have, some what are they called? Iron blasters. Having iron blasters, within range accepted. I can do unleash hell. I can be shooting you off the board, while the other parts of my board in my army is kind of advancing. And then if you get into my backfield, not only are you going to cop a bunch of shooting, but you're also going to be being sacrificed to the Mawpit. You're taking damage. It's a great defensive piece. It's almost like a little Blizzard Wizard for you. It's just a natural defensive piece for you. That's why I like the Mawpit, because most games I've played against ogres, I can't say the pot fills up very often. It's like you use it once. If you're lucky, you get a pot refill maybe once, twice at most, but it doesn't seem like it comes into effect very often, other than the initial allocation. Carlson, you might have a different experience, but for me, maybe because I just play around it, I just don't find my ogre opponents get to use it as much as they think they would like to.
Yeah, honestly, so the one-time heal is quite good, and I always assume that I'm only ever going to get one. It's really about, so you have some unit. I'm going to say specifically the Stonehorn. Every single wound that you have on the Stonehorn is extremely valuable because he's got a 3-up save and he's got a 5-up ward, so it's actually multiplied into like way more damage that your opponent has to do. So if you could potentially heal it for 3 at some point in the game, because he's usually in combat and can't heroic recovery, then that's very valuable. Another thing that's pretty valuable is, even though it's only a 1-inch range, you do get +1 to cast with your wizard from the Mawpot, sorry. Which sometimes you can like set it up vertically along the board and then have your wizards way back to do like a magical dominance or something and make it just more likely that you actually get it off. So that's usually what I use it for. Even though, again, it's not amazing, but yeah.
Glad you picked that up, because that was where I was going. The +1 to cast Unbinding and Dispelling, and with Primal Magic dice as well. That's where I find that you often find you've got just your wizard sitting behind the scenes, just tapping into that +1, especially if you don't have a native arcane or mystical terrain in your deployment zone.
Yeah. The only issue with that, though, is that everything in Ogres wants to be just absolutely sprinting at your opponent. So you're not going to get very much benefit from that. Like, you'll get it the first turn, and you might get it the second turn with like one of your wizards, but that's going to be the end of it, probably. Unless things are going really bad for you and your opponent is actually pushing you back, which you've got bigger problems if that's the case.
Yeah. So overall, good terrain feature, not an auto-include, not a trash tier. It's a viable option.
Yep.
If you're playing Beastclaw Raiders, probably keep with the Mawpot. Probably.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some builds. I'm sure there's some psychological pieces like, hey, I'm going to put the Mawpit on this side. I'll put my force on the other side. Stay away from it and then hooking. I'm sure there's plenty of ideas that you could build around it. But your initial take is Mawpit is better for Gutbuster.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other comments? I really like it. I actually, and it looks easy to paint as well. As much as the Mawpot has got some really cool, fun, dangly pieces, you could bash this out in like 2 hours.
I'm actually currently painting it. I'm going to show you, even though you didn't ask. But it's been so much fun. I'm just going to merge back into the meat dimension. But just like getting these teeth done, it's just been so much fun. Like the fleshy bits and also being able to paint terrain like you normally do. It's just been awesome. So having a blast painting it. And honestly, like even if you're not sure if you're going to use it in game, just buy it. Like it's an amazing looking piece of terrain. You could use it in games where ogres are not present and it's just going to be, impassable or something like that. Yeah.
Any painting tips when it comes to the teeth and the middle? By the way, smart idea, starting from the center and working your way out.
Thank you. Yeah, painting tips, not hugely. There's one thing, which is that the Mawpit kind of has to be put together like in 2 halves, which is a bit of a pain. So try not to get a seam, or if you have any like that Vallejo putty that you can kind of fill the gaps with, that's going to be really important. But yeah, otherwise, no.
Love it. Love it. Overall.
Sorry, one last thing that I have realized though is that obviously this is huge. So that's another thing to keep in mind about just like footprint in general. Like if you have a butcher garrisoning it, like a slaughtermaster, all of a sudden his 12-inch abilities are like from this footprint instead of like his little base. And then all of a sudden, if you do want to place this aggressively in your opponent's territory, now you have to force them to go into lanes instead of like just running straight at you. So you could prevent them from charging you first turn.
Yeah, that's a really good call out with the no man's land that I was going to say that I forgot to mention is you can split people's castles. If they've castled up, you can split them up, especially if they don't fly, by putting it in the center or moving it like in the where you think they're going to deploy, and they're either going to deploy elsewhere or they're going to have to break up their castles and move around, and then you with your speed, well, depending on how you build it, but you could start taking advantage of that split force.
Yeah, absolutely. But sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going
to say?
No,
I was going to segue us just to the next conversation. Like, no, keep talking. If you've got more things to talk about with the Mawpit, talk, please. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. I'm sure I'm going to remember something after and kick myself for it, but I think we're good to move on.
It's all right. We still have a little longer to go. You'll come back to it. The other part to this book is a new feature called the Armies of Renown. So for those who have no experience with Armies of Renown, they are different to Regiments of Renown. Regiments of Renown are a set of units that are wrapped up in a battalion that can be brought in outside of your faction. Just put that to the side. The Armies of Renown is I'm going to call it a sub-faction. It's probably the best way to describe it, where basically it is your Ogor Mawtribes as you currently enjoy it today, but you are trading off your allegiance abilities for new abilities. Okay, so there'll be some things you're going to gain, some things you're going to lose should you choose to go down an Army of Renown. It does have some restrictions, and the restrictions are that your army must be an Ogor Mawtribe. Okay, tick the box. In the Roving Maw, you've also got to use either Gutbuster or Gorger keyword. The end. So, Carson mentioned earlier, I always take a Frostlord on Stonehorn. You can't. If you take an Army of Renown, you can't. Heroes can only be included if they are not unique. So that's going to impact our Underworld's Warband. And all of the units gain the Roving Maw keyword. So I might pause there for a second. What are your thoughts on that level of restriction? Also, that obviously means you can't use Kragnos if you are someone who plays with Craggy.
Yeah, I think Armies of Renown are fun. I do think they're a little tricky when it comes to matched play, just because you're effectively writing like a new book. You're replacing all of the battle traits, you're replacing all of the battle tactics and grand strat, the artifacts that you can use, the command traits, like you're pretty much rewriting an existing thing. And with that, there can obviously be things that, come out from, or what happens in new books sometimes where it's like, oh crap, this is really unbalanced. We need to like fix this right away, or it just doesn't work out correctly. Or maybe there was something about the original army that, it relies on a battle trait a lot. So it's just not doing it with the Army of Renown. So I'm a little conflicted, but I think they're really cool from like a narrative standpoint. Like if I was playing a casual game with a friend, I would absolutely bring Roving Maw and we would do like a cool narrative scenario for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people generally have been upset with the armies of renown. There are some examples where they are like, if I was going to go to a tournament and I wanted to do the best I possibly could, would I take an army of renown? And the answer is usually no. Gargants, KO, maybe dragons might be some exceptions to those rules. But this is a fun, different way to play ogres. But how do we think about, so how do you feel at restrictions? Like, do you think that you lose too much yet? Because you mentioned, the command trait's going to change, your artifacts, your spells, your prayers, your grand strats, you can still pick the stuff from the Generals Handbook. You can still pick stuff from the unique, universal. It's just your ogre book stuff. You're essentially trading to use what we will show on this page and the next page. The next page has command traits, artifacts, yada yada yada.
Yeah. Sorry, your question is if I think this specific, like the Roving Maw, is too restrictive in what it
Yeah,
gives?
like you're a gutbuster player, so how do you feel around the restrictions around only using gutbuster and gorges in your list? Like, is this super impactful, or doesn't really change too much other than the Frost Lord?
This is very impactful for me. And one of the reasons why is actually, if you look at the battle traits for the Roving Maw, it does not include one key battle trait, which is included for Ogor Mawtribes, which is Trampling Charge. That was one of the most fun parts of Ogor Mawtribes for me, where like when you actually do make a charge, you roll the unmodified dice roll, and then for each X plus, it could be like 6, 5, or 4. You deal a mortal wound to your opponent, and so it's kind of like that, just scratches that gambling itch in your brain where you're like, okay, I made a 12-inch charge, which is insane. Let's see how many mortal wounds I do, and you do like 10 or something crazy like that. So they kind of took something fun out of Ogre Mawtribes, and to be honest, competitive too, which is a little tough.
Cool.
And then definitely not being able to include a stone horn is pretty big. And then, as I mentioned before, the unit that I mentioned at the beginning of this recording, Firebelly, is not a gutbuster for some reason. Like, he just magically doesn't have the keyword, so you can't include him in this list, which is sad. But
That makes no sense. Why
I
is
know
it not a
it's weird.
gutbuster?
I think lore-wise, he's supposed to be like different, like a traveling like spice salesman in a way, or like it's very, yeah, it's technically not part of like Gutbusters, but he should be, in my opinion. I
I
think that
remember.
everything in the book should either be Gutbusters or Beastclaw, and never both. So
I remember back in fantasy. So when we moved from fantasy to Sigma in first edition and maybe well up to second edition, when you went to the Games Workshop web store, Firebellies was its own sub faction. Like, it was just one model, one click. You're like, oh, maybe they're going to expand Firebellies, and we're now 8 years later, and no, there's no extra Firebelly models. So I'm like, okay, just make it a gutbuster. Like, I appreciate the lore, just make it a gutbuster.
I agree. I mean, he has his own spell lore, which is kind of crazy and cool, and I make use of it for sure, but I still think it should just be a Gutbuster.
All right. So we understand the restrictions, the pros and cons. You can still take it. You still can take your old stuff. It's not replacing. This is just an option for you. So should you make that choice of jumping into a Roving Maw army, let's talk about what you get. First things first is the Mawpits of Gur. So at the start of each battle round, after determining which players will take the first turn, you must determine the hunger status of the Mawpit on the battlefield by rolling 2d6. If you include a Mawpit in your army, add the number of models that have been slain by the head butcher ability during the battle. If the Mawpit is garrisoned by a head butcher, add 1 to the roll. So I'm adding 2d6, so rolling 2d6, and then adding a bunch of things depending on how many things I've killed and if there's a head butcher. Then after I've generated that result, I get to pick one result from the table. And what else? And a unit is vulnerable to Mawpits if it's on the battlefield within 1 inch of terrain. Okay, cool. So we've done a bunch of rules. We've done a bunch of rolling. We now can generate a number. So I can either get a 4 and a 5, which is subtract 1 from bravery characteristics that are vulnerable. You have a 6 to 8, which is roll a dice for each unit that's vulnerable. On a 5+, it suffers a mortal wound. 9 to 11, it's famished. Units are vulnerable, cannot issue commands if they're not a hero. or the Ravenous is roll a dice for each unit that is vulnerable to a Mawpit. On a 4+, it suffers D3 mortal wounds. So a unit's vulnerable to a Mawpit if it's on the battlefield, unless it is wholly within 1 inch of a terrain feature that is not the Mawpit or it can fly. Cool. So
yeah, it's the vulnerability effect is kind of interesting. There's going to be some armies that have like almost all flying, like Nighthaunt, for instance, which are just going to be like, cool, I don't care about this whatsoever, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, this is a really interesting effect. It somewhat makes up for the no trampling charge, where it's like, okay, every battle round we're gonna roll something, and something bad's gonna happen to you. Like it's kind of fun. It kind of scratches that gambling itch, like I said before. Yeah, it's pretty neat. I also like that you can pick any effect equal to or lower than what you rolled to. So you can say, maybe I don't care if my opponent, issues commands or not. Maybe I only want to deal more damage to them, or maybe I want to impact their bravery because they're gits or something like that. So it's nice that you have the choice instead of maybe randomly getting something that you don't actually want.
So there's really, really nice utility from the ability, and obviously you can pick whatever works for you. Let's say you spike the dice roll. Let's say you roll hot, or you've killed a bunch of things and you've got a really high score because of the head butcher as well. Which of the Mawpit table effects stand out to you more than others if you were to spike the roll?
Yeah, I mean, obviously doing 4 D3 mortal wounds on a 4+ is really good. If you are facing a really low bravery army like Gits and just like splashing that damage all over their army, that's going to be pretty devastating for them because they can only really save one of them from battle shock. Famished is also really good. Anytime that you can, block the ability to do commands, that's going to be really nice. So I would probably pick one of those two. Just because bravery is, it's nice, but it's not super, super amazing. Most of the time, if you're targeting one specific unit, it's going to be, they're just going to inspiring presence it anyway. But if you really want to flex on your opponent, technically you can pick subdued. You could just be like, you know what? Nothing's happening this turn. You're fine. You're safe this turn. And like a narrative beam or something.
That's some psychological.
Yeah.
I love it.
So I would probably pick either Famished or Ravenous for sure.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that an average 2d6 roll is a 7. Yes, numbers don't work statistically. Ask my primal magic dice who like to roll 1s, but it's not hard to get a 9, especially if you've got a head butcher sitting on the Mawpit. You've killed at least a model. It's a model. It's a number of models slain, not units slain. So you start chipping away at those 1 or 2 wound idiots, and you can rack up some of these numbers pretty quickly. And famished is a good little ability, like being able to shut down all that attack, all that defense. Obviously, a hero can issue it, but depending if someone's like taking a unit to the side, maybe not being babysat by a hero. That could be a really useful unit. But then Ravenous, as you said, like you look at Seraphon, what they do with their Slann or Croak, like the splash mortals and forcing battle shock on multiple units, it can be brutal.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ravenous isn't even really out of the question a lot of the time. I know if you said you spike it, you would get it, but if you get some good rolls on your head butcher ability and start really stacking up those benefits, you could be splashing these mortal wounds every single turn, like probably turns 3 and onwards, but still.
Yeah, I was saying spike more, like thinking about it from the early game where I haven't racked up those points yet. But yeah, like it's actually not. It's not a hard. It's not going to be hard to hit that 12 or at least the 9. Like the 9 is, as you mentioned, kind of by round 2 to round 3. It's not too far fetched to be hitting a 9.
Yeah, I might even take Rumbling on the first battle round if I spiked high enough not to roll Ravenous, but did get Famished, just because sometimes turn 1 nothing happens, right? You're not really going near your opponent, they're not really going near you, so shutting off their command abilities isn't really devastating. So maybe you just want to get chip mortal wounds across the table.
yeah, start the process, start preparing for the combat, but also maybe, you know, yeah, start chipping away at those little heroes sitting behind the scenes. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Couple of other rules. So you've got driven by starvation. So friendly Gorger units that are not wholly within 1 inch of a terrain feature at the start of your charge phase can attempt to charge even if they ran in the same turn. So good rule. Does it change the value and maybe some of the thoughts that we had earlier around including a Gorger's army if it's in a Roving Maw?
What was the question again? Sorry, I was reading the rules as you're asking.
No, that's fine. I was more thinking just around, we talked heavily already about Gorgers, and we talked about the pros and cons of, you know, taking another Gutbuster unit versus Gorgers. If I was running a Roving Maw army, does this now increase the likelihood or the value of taking a unit of Gorgers over something else?
I think so. And I think as we're going to see more in the rules here, you're probably going to want to take more Gorgers anyway. The Roving Maw feels kind of like a techie subfaction to me, just with the ability to shut off commands in multiple ways if you do bring Gorgers, which is pretty nice. And then being able to run and charge with your Gorgers basically means that you can really extend those 12-inch bubbles way further than normal. So yeah, I would definitely bring a lot more Gorgers in this list.
It also may mean that you don't put your Gorgers into ambush. You know, if you want to run and then charge, maybe it's actually better to put them on the board. As you mentioned earlier, do surround and destroy, have them already on the table, tap the sides of the board, and then they can kind of charge in really quickly. Then you go to the Butcher's Kitchen, which is another rule that complements Gorgers, where you can include a unit of Gorgers as battle line for each Butcher in your list. So assuming you're going to take this, you are already taking 1 Butcher. Would you take two Butchers and unlock a second battle line Gorger?
I would, actually, yeah. I think that would be interesting, just because another reason to take multiple Butchers is that, let's say your head Butcher dies, now you can just replace him. You put another Butcher into the Mawpit, and you get all of the nice effects that you can keep stacking up the benefits of Mawpits of Gur and try and really spike high with it, instead of just kind of it being over.
Yeah, and the Butcher does bring some good things, like it's a wizard, so yep, so it's a wizard, so it can definitely go into Antorian Acolytes Battalion if you wanted to sacrifice the 1-drop. You know, it does a bunch of healing. It has obviously the good Voracious Maw spell as well. So there is definitely benefits of taking multiple Butchers, and probably true to it today, especially in the Roving Maw.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
You also have your Ravenous Bites. I don't think that's changed at all from what you have traditionally in your allegiance ability. So you still keep the hungry or eating rule.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's the exact same.
Yeah, might makes right is the exact same. It's just that they've stopped. They haven't included the monster tech, so you can't use Beast Claw Raiders in this. So they've just kept it at the ogre stuff.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way that you can get anything with a monster keyword in this list, because in the regular spell lore for ogres, you can turn Iron Blasters into a monster with a spell if you want to, but because you're forced to use the Roving Maw spell lore, you won't be able to have access to that anymore. So,
bingo, yeah, you can't use the traditional spell lore, but you do have a new spell lore. The other one is, it looks like it's a variety, or like a modified version. So it's called Gobbling Bites as opposed to Gulping Bites, unless I've completely just written my own language. At the end of the combat, you roll a dice with it. It's on the 2-up, it's D3 plus 1, which is different to what you've currently got, because Gulping Bite is on a 4-up, it's D3.
Yeah, that's correct. So this is way more reliable, and it does more damage on average. There's also one very key difference here, whereas Gulping Bites specifically says Gutbusters Ogres units. This just says Gutbusters units, which means everything in this army is going to be able to do this, which means that those like pesky little Noblars that are just screens most of the times are actually going to be taking massive chunks out of your opponent on a 2+ even.
Glad you mentioned that, because one of the questions was actually more of a statement from Discord from Pask saying, Noblars get the bite. Not a question, but needs to be mentioned. So Really good point. In a traditional list, your Noblars wouldn't get those gulping bites. In the Maw, but you can't take. Noblars are gut busters. So you can you can absolutely. For some reason, I'm thinking gut buster is just ogre. No, it's completely different.
Those tiny little goblins, those are definitely gut busters. But the firebelly, no, absolutely not. Not a gut buster.
So the gulping bite in your traditional list, it's keyword locked to Gutbuster Ogre, which is why the Noblars can't take it. But because this is purely, Gutbuster, Noblars have Gutbuster keyword, thus allowing them to be able to bite.
Yeah, I really hope that they don't FAQ this away. I really hope it wasn't a mistake, just because I just find it like thematically hilarious that these tiny goblins are just like ravenously hungry and just like piranhas just swarming these enemies.
Look, if Games Workshop change that, I will lead the charge when it comes to the change.org petition. Like let's keep it as it is. Let them have it, folks. Just let them have it.
Yeah.
So page 1 of the Roving Maw. How are you feeling so far as an ogre player? Excited, curious, restricted? Give me your thoughts so far.
There's a very good chance that I wouldn't run this in a tournament. You said at the beginning that's kind of the case for most of the armies of renown. Like, you don't really want to be bringing them, but it's not so bad that you can't run it in a fun game against your friend or something like that. And I'm not even saying like both of you agree to have like easy, soft lists. Like, this does have some play. There's some interesting pieces to it, and it's not so restrictive in the units that you have available to you that it just doesn't work. Because you do have access to all gut busters, which is a huge portion of the ogre book. So yeah, I definitely think it's really cool. Really thematic too, which is fun.
When you take this to a tournament, you absolutely can, folks, by the way. We're not saying not to take it, but if your goal was to go 5-0, 4-1, and just do the absolute best, I don't think that this has the tools to allow you. More importantly, I think it restricts you with some of the tools that would help you unlock the most potential of ogres. That's what we're saying here. So if you want to run this and you want to take it to your next tournament, do it. You do you. But if you want to do the best, you probably may be better off just taking the Mawpit and or Gorgers in a traditional build list.
Yeah.
Well,
I would agree with that.
Let's see if he continues to agree with that when we go to the second page, because we do have command traits, we do have enhancements, and we do have a whole bunch of other things. So as we've mentioned, you do sacrifice your existing ones. So what do you like, for example, like you will sacrifice your Law of Gut Magic. You will obviously there's no Law of the Sun Eater because you can't bring in a Firebelly. So let's talk command traits. So the command trait is one option, which is called the Prime Gut Server. So this general knows all of the spells from the Law of the Great Maw in addition to other spells they know. So do you like it, or would you take something like I don't know, Shaman of the Chilled Lands, or even, something from the the universal rules like Master of Magic?
I think those are competitors for sure. The nice thing is that if you take Prime Gut Server, you can still take one of the Lore Primal Frost, and then you're probably not going to be taking Rupture. So you're basically choosing. I could have all of the Lore of the Great Maw and Hoarfrost, or all of it and Blizzard, which is pretty good. Like that's a pretty reasonable trade-off. I guess one reason not to have Shaman of the Chilled Lands is that you're really only getting one additional spell, and then you get to choose one of these. So I think it's a pretty good command trait. Maybe you want to take Master of Magic, but even then, like with the existence of Primal Dice being what they are, like Master of Magic isn't amazing. Just because as soon as you re-roll it, you can't use Primal Dice on that roll, which is a little unfortunate.
So while we're talking spells, so interesting, decent command trait. It probably becomes a bit more powerful when we actually look at the spells. So there are 3 spells from the Roving Maw Butcher spell lore. As I mentioned, you are sacrificing the Law of Gut Magic. So no Blood Feast, no Blubber Guts Stench, no Greasy Deluge, no Molten Entrails. Off the menu, can't take it in a Roving Maw list. The spells you do get is you get more meat, so it's a casting value of 6 and a range of 18. If successfully cast, pick one terrain feature within range and visible to the caster. For the rest of the battle, units on or within 1 inch of the terrain feature are vulnerable to Mawpits. Thoughts?
This one's pretty interesting. For the rest of the battle is a really rare thing to see for a spell. So to just permanently change something, regardless of if that butcher dies, is really cool. I think if I'm not mistaken, this actually makes it so that flying units can be vulnerable to maw pits now if they're within 1 inch of that terrain feature, or wholly within. Oh no, it just says within. So it basically makes a no-go zone for an army that would, normally not be vulnerable to the maw pit at all. So like Night Haunt all of a sudden can't go near this massive terrain feature in the center if you cast it on that. So that's pretty nice. It's a good piece of utility.
And by the way, we are recording pre-FAQ here. So if that does get clarified and it does say that flying still does avoid being vulnerable, then that's been clarified. We're using what we know as of today's. But really good point. That's a really good point to be able to tap into those units, either should your head butcher die and you've only got one butcher in your list, or you have a flying unit that you want to make vulnerable. This could be a great way to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next spell is a Retcher. So it's a spell that has a casting value of 7. If successfully cast until your next hero phase, improve the Ren characteristic of melee weapons used by the caster by 2.
You're probably not ever going to use this. Maybe if you want to have some fun, like the Slaughtermaster is a butcher, and he has a 2d6 attacks profile, so that could be scary. All of a sudden, that's 2d6 attacks, 3s, Ren 3, 1 damage. So you could use that to kind of like shave some wounds off something that has a really good save, but there's a lot of better options that you would do before you reach this point.
Because it's butcher only, so you improve the butcher's characteristic of either the tenderizer or the cleaver. Like that's all you're doing. Like you can't put it onto another unit. It's
right, but the Slaughtermaster has the butcher keyword.
Ah, yes, sorry, of course. Yeah. I'm just looking at the butcher keyword right now, going, okay.
Yep. I mean, even then, like the tenderizer or the cleaver, I think one of them is Ren 2 already.
Yeah, one's Ren 2. One is Ren 2.
So then you could be Ren 4 if you want to, which is pretty nice. But I think it's still just 2 attacks or something, right? I always bring the tenderizer because that's what I modeled it with, and it doesn't really matter a whole lot. So
yeah, tenderizer is 3 attacks. Cleaver is 3 attacks.
Oh, okay. So yeah, it's not terrible, but I just think there's better options before you would get to that point. Like you really don't want your butchers in combat most of the time. They're not very tough.
So what you're thinking about is when you use Retcher, you're thinking about it on the stump blades because it's got that 2d6 potential.
Yeah. I mean, on any of the butchers, like their attacks profiles aren't terrible, so you could certainly use them. But yeah, again, like you're probably not using this spell most of the time.
No, like when I first read it, I was underwhelmed. Now, if I could put it onto a unit of Iron Guts or some type of Gluttons or some other, if I could project it onto a different unit, like it's a different version of Hoarfrost, I think I'm much more excited. But the fact that I need to put it onto a Butcher or Slaughtermaster, that seems less appealing to me. A nice get out of jail, kind of like if I find myself in a situation, but one that I don't want to build around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you could project this to other units, that would be insane. I would take it every single time, just because Ren 4 Iron Guts or Ren 3 Gluttons would be nuts.
Unless you play against Nighthaunt.
Yeah, that's true.
Nighthaunt meta stonks rising.
Yeah.
The last one is Offalbringer. So this is strap in, folks. It's story time with Coach here. It's a spell that has a casting value of 6 and a range of 12. If successfully cast, pick one enemy unit within range and visible to the caster. Your opponent must make a move of up to 6 inches with that unit. All of the models in that unit must finish that move as close as possible to the caster and can finish that move within 3 inches of the caster. If it is impossible for that unit to make a move, it suffers D3 mortal wounds instead. After that unit has moved, if that unit is within 3 inches of the caster and that caster is within 6 inches of the Mawpit in your army, you can immediately use the Mawpit head butcher ability, but you must pick that enemy unit to be the target.
Yeah. This is an interesting spell. There's a couple of very key wording things to note here. Number one is that it says that you can move within 3 inches of the caster. You still can't move within 3 inches of other friendly units, as the spell has worded. So there has to be like a 100% clear path between, or like an accessible path between the caster and whoever it's being casted onto. Another unfortunate thing is that it's 12-inch range, which is not amazing. Like when you think of other pull things, I think Corn has a 16-inch range, and then you can push yourself before actually doing that with that prayer. So they get a little bit more value for a very similar effect. Yeah, I like this is a nice tool to have, but I don't think that it would be my first choice to cast most of the time. But yeah, it's neat nonetheless, because anything that you can do to bring your opponent closer to you is nice, but for them already to be within 12 inches of a caster as well is going to be like it's going to be tough to do.
I think this is a great spell if you have Prime Gut Server, because you know the spell lore, so that you will use this often if you have that. But if I was building a list and I didn't know the entire spell lore, Offalbringer is not my first choice.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a nice tool to have in your back pocket, but I don't know that I would only bring this for a butcher, like as like their only spell that they know.
Let's rank them. Let's assume we're not taking Prime Gut Server. What do we rank them as? 1, 2, 3. Top pick is.
I would probably say, yeah, it depends on your opponent, but I would say in general, probably Offalbringer is actually the best out of the three. Then I would say Mawpit, and then I would say Retro after that. And the reason why I say that is because with Mawpit, you're going to go against opponents sometimes where everything's vulnerable to the Mawpit anyway, so that spell effectively doesn't matter. Whereas with Offalbringer, it could potentially be useful against any army if they get close enough.
Depending on how they may FAQ or clarify the interaction with flying, I probably would tend to go Mawpit if it is favorable FAQ kind of ruling. If it's unfavorable, then yeah, Offalbringer for me would be number one. Retcher, maybe, and with the Slaughtermaster, I think definitely. And finest hour to get that wound on a 2+. Ren 3, if you do well on the 2d6 attack roll, could be a very powerful little unit at the right time, but it's situational.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right, so that's a spell lore done, and that's our command traits done. Let's look at our other things. So you do have a 1 artifact. So unfortunately, all of your plunders of the gut hold are no longer available. So leave your splatter cleaver and your gruesome trophy rack at home if you play the Roving Maw, but you will get the flask of congealed Maw juices. Once per battle at the start of the hero phase, you can pick 1 Mawpit in your army that is within 9 inches of the bearer, and that has the effect. And that has been affected by a rule that says that you cannot use the scenery rule on its war scroll, aka Smash to Rubble. Roll the dice. On a 2+, that Mawpit is no longer affected by that rule, and you can use the scenery rule on the war scroll once more. So basically, we bring back the Mawpit from the dead. Yeah,
absolutely. I think this is a really cool ability. The only thing that I don't like about it, and this is kind of prevalent on other rules in Warhammer as well, is it's a once per game ability on a dice roll. So once per game, something might not happen, which is kind of unfortunate. I see it all the time with like Sylvaneth players, like bringing in some dryads. They're like, guess how many times I rolled a 1 in this tournament? It's 5. Like, it can happen. And when you take an artifact and get burned like that, it's just a feel bad moment. So that's my only gripe with it. But what I like about it is that the Mawpit specifically has something against, like, if something stomps it and fails, then it deals a bunch of damage to it. But even if it succeeds, you're like, it's probably coming back, and you're going to have to do this again. So it's even more reason for your opponent to really struggle with the idea of stomping your terrain.
And they might just go, you know what? Because in people's mind, they think of best. It's funny, actually, you mentioned that, because I was literally yesterday at an RTT and we were having this exact conversation about once per battle, 2-up rolls and how often it fails. It just happens to always happen. But to your point, like when we're playing and we're talking through our lists and our deployments and our strategy, you're like, what's your artifact choice? Like, oh, I can bring it back from the dead once per battle on a 2+. Everyone just thinks automatic succeed. Then I'm not going to risk my monster being, 3d6 mortal wound because they think worst case scenario. So again, it might just reinforce that people will completely ignore it, and you just chip away, use your Mawpit abilities through the armies of renown. And by the way, you obviously can't use this artifact in another version of this list. Like you've got to use it in only Roving Maw.
Yeah.
Would you take this over a traditional like universal artifact if you were building a Roving Maw?
I think so, yeah. Especially because this GHB doesn't give you access to like custom artifacts. It's the nullstone adornments instead. One argument could be made about if you bring a tyrant to this list, which is a gutbuster, you could put arcane tome on him, which could be pretty useful, but that relies on you bringing a tyrant in the first place. Otherwise, I don't see any like better options. So yeah, I would probably bring this in a Roving Maw list.
Then there is, I would too, actually. I think this sub-faction is so built around the Mawpit that you want to keep it on the board. So yeah, I definitely would use it, hands down. There is one grand strategy and 3 battle tactics. The grand strategy for a Roving Maw army is still not
satiated.
Sorry, I'm trying to read it very smallly on my screen. Thank you. Like I'm trying to read. I should just read it on my big screen. I've actually got it on my small screen. Anyway, when the battle ends, you complete the grand strategy if 6 or more enemy models were slain by a Mawpit head butcher ability.
Yeah. So as we kind of mentioned before, when looking at the Mawpit War Scroll, head butcher is kind of like hit or miss. If you go against an army that doesn't have anything of a wounds characteristic of less than 3, this is just an auto fail grand strat, unfortunately, just because head butcher will never go off. And then even when you are going into one, like like an army that has a lot of 1 wound units or something, you might think like head butcher most of the time is going to be killing like 1 unit, maybe 3 if you're really, really lucky. So it could be hard to get this off, especially because your butcher could die by the end of the battle. However, Awful Bringer does interact with this pretty well, because if you're if you bring someone within a certain range of the Mawpit, then it does trigger their head butcher ability again, which is pretty nice. But that's pretty situational. So I probably wouldn't run this grand strat, just because you almost know that you're going to have butchers in your list in the first place, so you might as well bring this spellcasting savant or something with the current GHB.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned, there's just a couple of armies where this is just unachievable. You cannot, like for example, if I played my sons against you, how do you do this? Like, how do you score your grand strategy against sons? Like, it's literally unachievable.
Yep.
And that's just one. That's just one of a couple of examples. You referred to OBR before. Like what happens in Flesh Eater Quartz drops and everyone's running flayers and horrors. Not ghouls. Like there's a bunch of 4-wound idiots.
Or if you go against another ogre player where most of their stuff is going to have 4 or 5 wounds, and they might have Nobblars, but the Nobblars probably won't be very close to you. So,
or your opponent just just stays out of range. So okay, cool. You just deny your grand strategy, you sacrifice and move away the Nobblars.
Yep.
All right, so a bit of a miss there with the grand strat. Yeah, it's too restrictive. The other ones are your battle tactics. So that was just a morsel. You complete the tactic if any enemy models were slain by the Mawpit head butcher ability this turn.
This one's decent. You could say that there's a pretty okay chance that you would get this if a unit is 1 wound and also like within 12 inches of the Mawpit, because then you could also... Sorry, dog's coming back.
Hey, doggo. You got the dog.
Yeah. So if you have an enemy unit that's got like a 1 wound characteristic, is within 12 inches of the Mawpit, then all of a sudden you have 2 chances at actually satisfying this, which is pretty nice if you pull them close enough to the Mawpit. So I would bring it then, but most of the time it's kind of risky, because even if you are targeting a unit that has 1 wound, you still have to roll a 3-up in order to kill a unit in it, because it has to be more than double, right?
Yeah.
So a battle tactic on a 3-up is not great. Like there are a lot of other battle tactics that are like, you should be pretty sure that you're going to be able to do them if you take a battle tactic.
It's not auto achieve, But in the situation, you might find it's easier than, you know, landing a charge and hoping they don't roll high on a redeploy and like all these other things. So it's not auto, but it's definitely achievable. But dice roll is risky.
Yeah.
Slavering ambush, you complete the tactic if a friendly Gorger's unit was set up on the battlefield using the hunter's ambush hunter ability this turn and made a charge move this turn. So there's no bonus to charge, if I remember correctly. It's just a flat dice roll.
Yeah. So this is again, it's achievable, especially like the more units of Gorgers that you bring, the more of a chance that you have to actually achieve it, and then you can re-roll one of them. So a whole bunch of re-rolls on a 9-inch charge essentially could make it fairly achievable, but I would say it's, you know, not great. You could take it in a pinch, I guess, but yeah, most of the time I'd be trying not to do this.
9-inch charge is harder to hit than a 3-up. I'll tell you that much. So
Yeah.
if you don't like the idea of that's just a morsel, you won't like the ambush one, because you will. I mean, at least the Gorges can issue their own command, which is really good. So it's still a reroll charge is 50%.
It's like a coin flip, basically.
Yeah. So.
But if you have multiple units, then again, if let's say you have like 3 or 4 packs of Gorgers dropping down, maybe not a bad idea, right? Like you could maybe make the argument that this is a pretty easily achievable tactic, but even then, dice could still mess with you.
Good call out. So if you took 1 unit of Gorgers, it's a risky play. If you took 2 units of Gorgers and you ambush them both in the same turn, then the likelihood probably significantly increases. But you are now paying 440 to pull off this battle tactic. Is it worth it?
Yeah.
I'll leave that up for you all to decide. The last battle tactic is we eated them all, and you pick one objective controlled by your opponent. You complete this tactic if you control that objective at the end of this turn, and there are no enemy models contesting it.
I think this one's the gimme, where they're like, okay, the other 2 are a little bit too hard to achieve, or like not super great in certain situations. So, you know, this is a pretty standard, like, just wipe someone off an objective essentially. So, yeah, this one's doable for sure.
Situational, obviously you got to pick the right unit, but it's what you want to do anyway, right? You want to go in, you want to kill things, you want to take people off objectives.
Yeah, and a lot of other armies that have similar battle tactics to this have to have certain types of unit on the objective. Like I know the new Cities of Sigmar, that's going to be the case. Seraphon has one that's like that with skinks. So it's nice that there are no restrictions whatsoever. It's like you can put whatever you want on the objective to force your opponent off of it, as long as you take it.
I can see a world where we're fighting and your opponent has 1 model on an objective, right? You're forced to battle shock, and they're within 12 inches of the Gorges, and you're going for that casino roll. Like, if I can hit that 5-up, you can't issue inspiring presence, and that thing runs away. I like this rule a lot, and yeah, it's easy to achieve, but not auto include. It's not auto. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're at the end of the Roving Maw, and we're going to the other rules for the ogres in general. But now that we've kind of explored this, how are you feeling about the Roving Maw? Are we going to not run Meat Fist, and we're going to now use the Roving Maw? Have we convinced ourselves this is still a fun but not the most competitive build? Like, where are you at now that we've explored everything?
Yeah, so I wouldn't take this if I was attempting to go for a 5-0 at a tournament. If I don't think that it is truly the most competitive that ogres can be, unfortunately. But it's still not untakeable. Like if I was going to a charity event, or if I just wanted to have fun, or if I just wanted to play with a friend and have a fun game with them, like I would definitely consider taking this.
The dog seems to agree. Thank you. Yeah. You tell them. You tell them. My general feel is it is fun. It is interesting. It's not the most competitive optimum build. It is restrictive, and for me, if I was running ogres, I think I still would like the Frostlord on Stonehorn. I do like, as you mentioned, the Firebelly. There's some other units that I think maybe it's too restrictive. If the fire belly could be included, maybe it's a bit easier, but overall it's fun. There's some interesting, and if you are an experienced ogre player, this might just actually be a completely different way to play your army, and it actually just might bring some fresh life to an old book.
Yeah, and that's something that Ogres already has in general, which is multiple different play styles for people that want to play in different ways, and this gives you another one. So I'm really happy that that's the case. You know, some armies really don't have that luxury. You're just like, you kind of have to bring this, or else it's just not competitive whatsoever. So I'm happy to be in that spot.
Yeah, and I think the Mawpit does bring a different dimension as well. So even if you don't choose the Roving Maw, you can just put a Mawpit into your list and see how that, as opposed to the Mawpot, will change the way you run your army and you even build your army.
Absolutely.
Cool. Cool. Well, given that we've talked Mawpits and Mawpots and Gorges and Roving Maws, let's maybe do like a rapid fire, go through the allegiance abilities and how we're thinking. I mean, not completely rapid fire, but like we'd have to go through every single rule. We'll be here forever. As a ogre player, Roving Maw or not, like that's just completely general handbook this now. How are you thinking about this as you head to your next major tournament? Are there particular rules that you mentioned? For example, the trampling charge you thought was a massive miss by not being in the Roving Maw. You talked a little earlier about the stone horn and the ability of the unstoppable charge, and making sure we've got one of those in our list where possible. Are there particular rules that you build around, you enjoy, that are super valuable, or yeah, tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, both of those things that you just mentioned, I build around a lot. Trampling charge is huge. There's going to be some armies that are going to be really tough to crack save-wise. So just charging them to death is going to be really big. One that comes to mind is, I can't remember which subfaction, but for Lumineth Realm Lords, they can bring the cows where they basically ignore Rend 1 and 2, which is pretty big. Or they subtract the Rend by 2 now. And that's pretty devastating for Ogres. So now you can just kind of like punch them to death essentially with Trampling Charge, which is great. Whenever I build a list, I generally try to make it so that my opponent never feels safe. And the Stonehorn is a really big piece of that because it can move 14 inches, charge, and then fly over a bunch of stuff. So not having access to that is really big. And then the general spell lore for Ogres is actually very useful utility-wise too. Like, there will be some times where I feel like I can't muzzle my opponent off an objective, but I turn the Iron Blaster into a monster and then just tow it onto the objective, and now it counts as 10, so that they can't take it away from me, which is pretty big. So just a lot of the general utility aspects of Ogres that are in the main book, but not included in the Roving Maw are probably the difference there.
Yeah, you've got some really good rules, but I don't think rules that really shape your list, right? You know, might makes right is a great rule, and whether you're building Beastclaw Raiders or Gutbusters, you know, you're going to be having more models contesting objectives. So that doesn't change too much. Your Ravenous Bite, you know, whether you're in combat or advancing into combat, that's super helpful. Trampling Charge is what you want to do anyway. You want to charge into combat where possible, and you get to do mortal wounds for doing so. The Grasp of the Everwinter is fun, but more of a late game thing, really. Like it doesn't come into play too often.
There are some times where I'll leap the Stonehorn directly into the center of my opponent, and then he'll have like Finest Hour, Mystic Shield, just be like an unkillable block. And then if you have multiple enemies in range of him, when Grasp of the Everwinter happens, like chances are he's going to deal damage to something. I don't really factor that in most of the time, but it's a nice to have for sure.
No, you're not building a strategy around making the most of Grasp of the Everwinter, but having it is better than not having it.
Yep.
We talked a little bit about Unstoppable Charge and why probably everyone should have a Stonehorn if possible. It's just a fantastic being able to charge, and you know, you don't want to get tied up in a screen of idiots because you want to get into that juicy center. You want to go fight something that you really want to fight, and blocks of 10 wound idiots are just like, they're just annoying. You want to get into the good stuff. Obviously, Unstoppable Charge helps you get into that, to kill key heroes, to remove those wizards, to destroy those shrines and those buff pieces, to get into maybe the elite units before they get into you. But what about the chill of the Everwinter? Are you thinking about Thunder Tusks as well and the ability to strike last as a monstrous rampage? Or is it just if your list happens to have one, yay me?
Definitely the latter. And also, I normally don't make, absolute statements like this, but you should almost never bring a Thunder Tusk, in my opinion. They're not good. The war scroll that they've been given, just like it just kind of doesn't quite do enough in any direction. So this isn't even something I've really thought about, this monstrous action.
It's funny because the Thunder Tusk really used to be heavily taken because of the priest ability.
Yep.
Everyone wanted the priest on Thunder Tusk, but now you can make a Stonehorn a priest. Often I see people taking Thunder Tusks only when they don't have the points for another Stonehorn. And and like changing their list too much, which is new to what they were doing. So they'll take the Frost Lords, they'll take the Thunder Tusk support piece as opposed to trying to force in another Stonehorn priest.
Yeah, exactly. But even then, I feel like there's probably other options. Like maybe you would be able to take an Icebrow Hunter and do the deep strike onto points in the backfield or something like that. Like I don't know. I don't see like a very good use case for Thunder Tusks most of the time, especially when they aren't a hero and they can't be a priest. If you just have like the Thunder Tusk Beast Riders, then it's even worse, right? Because then you don't get access to that very valuable keyword.
I mean, obviously the shooting attack from the Thunder Tusk can be quite helpful, but even the changes to Lookout Sirs probably hurt that as well, given that you can hide those little heroes, because that was like why you take it. You wanted to snipe those little heroes. And some people might take two Thunder Tusks to kind of take them out. But now it's a lot harder. The value is definitely diminished more.
There is one meme list that I want to bring up, which is very funny. Is that if you can just pack as many Thunder Tusks as you possibly can into a list, any of the big beasts can take a Blood Vulture, which is basically like you pick a unit on the battlefield and on a 2-up, it just takes a mortal wound. So if you have like 7 of those in your list, you're like, okay, that support hero in the back, you're 7d6. Every 2-up is a mortal wound to him, so you're just like picking them off one by one, which is pretty funny. But unfortunately, it doesn't really do anything past that. But I do love it.
It's just a big bunch of snowballs in your winter school holiday, I don't know, snow day. What about the tribes? So we talked tribe. We haven't really talked tribes just yet. But where do you stand in regards to like the most competitive builds right now? Either side, the Beast Claws or the Gutbusters.
Yeah, so the biggest ones that you're going to see are going to be Meat Fist, Underguts, and Boulderhead, which isn't to say that the other ones are useless. It's just you don't see them as much, and in my opinion, there isn't as much competitive play with them. Meat Fist is really good just because more mortal wounds is great. If you run a whole bunch of minimum-sized unit Gutbusters, then you can be averaging like 15, 20 mortal wounds on a really good charge phase, which is crazy. Underguts can be nice because giving extra Ren to an Iron Blaster is going to be super good. Your Lead Belchers too, like being able to reach something at a threat range of 39 inches with the Iron Blaster at Ren 3 is pretty awesome. Like you could just absolutely drop stuff off the board. And depending on your matchup, it could be devastating. Now the only issue with Underguts is that with any shooting castle-ish list, it's a skew list, right? If you go against the wrong thing, then it's kind of a rough day for you. And then Boulderhead is what you're going to see a lot when people run monster trucks, just because it's more wounds, and you can have more mount traits if you want to as well. So just tougher, bigger monsters with more cool stuff on them. Easy choice.
Yeah, you definitely want the extra. If you're running a Beast Claw Raider, you definitely still want the extra mount traits and the extra wounds. Like it's just it's the Hammers of Sigmar for Ogres. Like it's just good. I have played against a couple of Winterbite lists, and they were fine. They were fine, but if you're not a shooting army or someone that's not tied into shooting, it's a little bit less useful. Although with new cities, with Fusiliers, you might find that more people might be taking more shooting. So you might see the resurgence of bow snakes. You might start seeing sentinels hitting the table. You've obviously still got your Blissbarb archers, running right in Slanesh. So maybe this is like an RTT type, take it to your one dayer. But I don't mind Winterbite if shooting continues to rise.
Yeah, absolutely. In general, I try to stay away from abilities that are like, it's useful if I go against this specific thing, but if I don't, then it's just absolutely useless. That's a bit of a disappointment sometimes, but definitely if we see cities start to dominate the meta, then Winterbite could see an uptick for sure. Yeah. And then for the other ones that I didn't talk about as much, Blood Gullet, like an extra spell can be pretty nice, but one issue is that our butchers are pretty, in my opinion, overcosted. Like 140 points for a one cast wizard is a little bit much, especially when the spell lore that we have access to isn't super great. So having an entire subfaction just around giving you one extra cast per each of those wizards feels like a little bit of like a tax almost that you have to pay. It's like, now I feel obligated to bring more butchers, which costs a lot of points. So it's not going to be great. And then with Thunderbellies, Mornfang is just not quite there, in my opinion. they're pretty awkward to move around, and they just don't quite deal the same damage output as like monster trucks or regular gutbusters.
I partially disagree with you on the cost of butchers. Like, it might go down 10 points. The reason for it is, like, my wizards, like when I play cities, my wizards are what, 110, 120, I think 110, 120. Stormcast wizards are like 120. And then, yeah, you know, the Stormcast have a better armor save, but you've got more wounds, and each time you cast a spell on a 2-up, you heal a wound. Now, yes, you can take a mortal wound on a roll of a 1, but your wizards are way more survivable than mine. So that's probably my counter argument. But could it be 130? Yeah. I'm not 100% settled on 140, but it could go 10 points either way.
Yeah, those are totally fair arguments. I guess another thing as well is that butchers also have diminishing returns, just like Stonehorns, where it's like you usually have one spell that you want to get off that turn that's actually like valuable to you, and then after that, everything else is kind of like, maybe it's going to be useful, maybe not. So having multiple butchers with multiple casts isn't, super amazing in the first place, because you've got like a couple utility spells at most.
No, that's two. That's approaching 300 points for 2 butchers / slaughtermasters, right? So all of a sudden, that is, when you start looking at 300 points, that is so many things.
Yep.
Anything else you'd say on the Mawtribes? I probably tend to agree with you. Again, it depends on how the meta goes, and what does Feck and what does Dawnbringers 4 and 5 and 6 and 8 and 11, what are they all doing, and what boosts, and how does the meta shift? And December is rolling around quickly, and January we might see a 6-month Age of Sigmar rebalance. So who knows what that looks like? Does Blizzard change, and how, like, there's so many things that could happen that would shift maybe the opinions, but I generally agree. Underguts, Meat Fist, Boulderhead, probably the 3 strongest.
Yeah, and then probably in order of what you're most likely to see at a tournament, Boulderhead is going to be at the top, Meat Fist after that, and then Underguts after that. Probably it's like a sharp fall off after Meat Fist, I would say.
Yeah, 12 months ago.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, 12 months ago, it was just nothing but Underguts, thanks Tom Guan, for Iron Blasters, all the Noblars, some crazy shenanigans, but that kind of has definitely dropped off. I wouldn't be surprised to see it rise again with the castles. It would not surprise me at all.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Or at least a variant of what that Underguts list was bringing. So you got your command traits available to you. Do you have any favorites, both from from all of them, really? Like, if you're building an army right now, what are your favorite command traits?
Yeah, I personally use Gastromancer for my command trait right now, just because there is no useless ogre spell. There's always a use case for each of the spells in the gut magic lore. So it's nice to be able to pick and choose rather than kind of locking in one and hoping that you run into the right stuff with it. So I like having that little, like, Swiss Army knife of a command trait there. Reluctant Rabble Rouser is really funny, and I like it a lot just because if you are running an Underguts list and you have like 60 Noblars just like surrounding all of your very valuable cannons, and all of a sudden they just can't battle shock, that's really difficult for your opponent to deal with. And then getting anywhere near the Noblars in the first place is really dangerous for them because of the nature of their ability of, dealing chip mortal wounds whenever you finish a move within 6 inches. So that's fun. If you are bringing a Tyrant and he is your general, killer reputation is really nice to have. you can make him pretty unkillable. Like you can give him a 3-up save and a 5-up ward, just like the Stonehorn, and all of a sudden that's 8 wounds on those characteristics that you have to deal with too. So that's fun. So those 3 would probably be the biggest. And then my personal favorite is Gastromancer. For Beast Claw Raiders, Voice of the Avalanche is really good. You basically get like 1 free command point once per game, and then also no restriction on like where you can actually issue commands to, which is super nice. So that's what I would probably bring. And then Touched by the Everwinter is also really nice to give like a Stonehorn the priest keyword, like you were saying earlier. So those are the 2 big ones that you would definitely see. And then
I want to see it.
Go ahead, sir.
I was just going to, don't call me sir.
I said sorry. I said go ahead, sorry. Not sir.
He said sir. I'm like, oh, whoa.
Sorry, sir. Please. Yeah.
Don't put that pressure on me. I've always said to people, like, people harass me constantly about becoming an ogre player. And I'm like, there are 2 things stopping me. One, the static pose of a Stonehorn. Like, if it was multi-pose, I could definitely get into it. The other one is, if I ever built an ogre army, it would be heavily focused around man-eaters. There's something about man-eaters that I absolutely love. And I want to see a day where ex-mercenary becomes like a great command trait. But I just can't build around man-eaters. They're fun, they're interesting, but I just can't build around them. And that's currently stopping me from jumping into the ogre pool.
I feel the exact same way, but the reason why I can't get into man-eaters is because they're resin models only. And like you have to buy like these very specific kits. So if they did like a revamp of the man-eaters kit, I'd be all over that. And I'd be trying to make a list work for sure. But
I
don't want to buy that many.
I did actually think at one point that man-eaters might get redone, because like you watch the GW web store and the man-eaters were slowly being taken off, and I'm like, this must be a sign they're going to relaunch them, plastic kit, put it in one of those FOMO boxes, and give me a bunch of options, multi-kit. No, didn't happen. So that's why I'm not an ogre player.
Yep, it'll happen someday though, and you will be. You will join us.
Give me my man-eaters. The dog agrees. The dog's like, yes, give him man-eaters.
Yeah, sure.
And you were going to talk about the Entorian Locuses. If you were going to pick from that particular command traits, is it Shaman?
Yeah, I would do Shaman of the Chilllands. And that is what I ran for the first couple tournaments I did of this GHB. Just because it's nice to have access to Blizzard. If you do just want to pick one ogre spell, if there's one that you know is the only one that you want to cast, then having access to both Hoarfrost and Blizzard is super nice. So that's what I would go with. I was toying with Eater of Magic for a little bit, just because it's funny, like to be able to potentially just like eat one of your opponent's spells, especially because it stacks pretty nicely with Optimal Focus, where you get a second unbind with that caster. So you have 2 chances of doing that as well, but it's just too unlikely to happen for it to be like viable, in my opinion.
Plus, you got the more pot, so you get the +1 to unbind as well, your primal dice. You could actually build into it. If you do Entorian Acolytes with Eater of Magic, someone sitting at the back with the more pot. I mean, obviously there's some armies like KO and Khorne where they couldn't care less if you eat their magic, but it could be quite powerful, but then it can be completely useless.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the conclusion I came to too, which is why I don't use it anymore.
It's a good idea, but yeah, like I can see you just building a list, and like for the first 3 games, you just play nobody who cares. So they got like 2 casts, and like, okay, cool, bro.
Yep.
But shutting down Mystic Shield even can be helpful.
Yeah, very true.
What about your artifacts? And we'll pause the mount traits for a second. We'll just talk purely artifacts.
Absolutely. I think if you're going to be running a Gutbusters artifact, Gruesome Trophy Rack is the auto include, especially if you're running Underguts. So if you have that situation where you have 4 Iron Blasters, you've got like a Butcher sitting in the center of them, which has Gruesome Trophy Rack. All of a sudden, if there's like a Bloodthirster across the board, you're like, cool, I'm hitting you on 3s and 2s, Ren 3, D3 plus 3 damage. Like, it's not going to last very long. You can really like murder something. This is also pretty decent into OBR, because almost every OBR is going to be bringing Catacross, and it says monster or hero. So you're just blasting Catacross with like 8 shots on 3s and 2s, -3 because it's Underguts, D3 plus 3 damage. Like it's pretty big. But even outside of Underguts, this can be pretty good if you run a lot of Foot Ogres, just because all of your Gutbusters are benefiting from it, right? So if you don't have to be spending command points to be hitting on 2s, that's great. Yeah, it's really, really solid artifact.
You're
The
talking
other
lead
three,
belchers. You're talking lead belchers, right?
no, I mean, like even if you have Iron Guts within 12 inches of this hero, it just says add 1s to hit rolls. So it doesn't have
Oh,
to be shooting.
true. Yeah, for some reason I just associate gruesome trophy rack with shooting, but you're right. I think actually I just assumed like with when the book came out, everyone was running underguts and it was always gruesome trophy rack, so I just associated it always to missile.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be. It can be on any melee attack, any shooting attack, whatever you want. So that's why it's an auto include, in my opinion, if you are bringing a Gutbusters list. Other Gutbusters ones are not amazing. The Flask of Stonehorn Blood is kind of neat, I guess, but you're saving a foot hero once maybe, and then chances are you might run into something that can turn off wards, and that's going to make this command trait not very good. Splatter Cleaver is okay. Like you could put it on your Tyrant, but the Tyrant is not enough of a beat stick for it to matter too much, in my opinion. And then the Fang of Gur, same reason. Like you're getting Ren 3, which is nice, but the Tyrant is just like not. There's better options for sure. Like I would much rather have +1 to hit on everything near the Tyrant as opposed to just him having -3 on one of his weapons. For Beastclaw Raiders, the Seed of Alvagur is pretty cool. You can do a second Monstrous Rampage. That's one thing that a lot of people kind of like debate with sometimes, is that you'll do your Surf with the Stonehorn, and then all of a sudden, he's next to another monster and he can't roar them, he can't Titanic Duel or something like that. So it's a little bit tough to fight them. But once per game, you could say, okay, I'm gonna fly over all of your units, and then I'm gonna roar this thing, or I'm gonna like Titanic Duel something so that I don't have to spend a CP next phase, or yeah. So that's pretty nice. And that's probably what I would take from there. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on favorites from Gutbusters or Beastclaw?
I've seen the Elixir of the Frostworm, and that can be nice. But then I also get just like PSTD and like think of rolling a 2 up, but then I roll a 1 for the mortal wound and wonder why I used a once per battle artifact for 1 mortal wound. I think you're right. The seat is definitely the pickup. If I'm taking a Frostlord and Stonehorn, I'm definitely doing this because as a Gargant play, for example, the Beast Smasher allows me to do 2 monstrous rampages, and being able to stomp and roar, or being able to Titanic Duel and roar, and then you add the extra layer of the unstoppable charge. That is so valuable. So,
Yeah.
100%.
It also helps you with a battle tactic. So for Ogres, there's a battle tactic where you have to carry out 4 monstrous rampages in 1 turn. All of a sudden, 2 of them are covered by 1 unit, so you don't have to charge with 1 additional Stonehorn or something. You could kind of be a little bit more reserved, so that helps a lot too. Yeah.
Yeah, good call. Good call. With your mount traits, I think this is going to be a really quick one, right? Because we've already talked about this Thunder Tusks not being as valuable, and if you're going to go with Boulder Head, you get 3 mount traits anyway. So it's just picking the priority of who gets what. Is it Metal Cruncher that's number 1?
Nope, it's Rockmane Elder. That's number 1, I think. -1 to wound is insane. Especially because it's just flat -1 to wound against everything, shooting, melee, everything. And if you can stack as many buffs as you can on a Frostlord on Stonehorn, including the -1 to wound, it's like nigh unkillable. So that's my first choice every time. Metal Cruncher is definitely a second. It's still very good, but I go for Rockmane Elder every time if I have one choice.
So Rockmane number 1, Metal Cruncher second, Belligerent Charger is the third. Is your order of preference?
Belligerent Charger is actually really bad, in my opinion.
Good call. I was going to say this because I've seen a lot of people. Initially you're like, oh, cool, 7 charge of 7 is 7, great. But then there's the other ugly side.
Yeah, exactly. It's not actually making you a minimum of 7 inches to charge. It's only for the purposes of the trampling charge battle trait. So if you think of the different scenarios that can happen, if you already roll a 7 or above charge, it's a useless mount trait. If you roll a 7 or less, there's a decent chance that you're actually out of range to charge whatever it is that you wanted to charge, and it becomes kind of a useless mount trait. So there's like a tiny window of you being in range of the thing that you have to charge and not rolling more than what this gives you in the first place for it to actually see benefit. So not great, in my opinion. Like I would take it if I had just because, like, if I had the option, then sure, but it's definitely not going in over the other two.
If it was not tied to trampling charge, so if it was like charge rolls less than 7 are counted as 7, like that's auto include number 1. Like, but because it's only for the trampling charge, it's like less value.
Yeah, definitely agree. And then for the Thunder Tusk, again, I don't typically bring Thunder Tusks, but Rime Frost Tide is a really solid one. Of having a ward of 5+ is nice. Adding 1 to charge rolls isn't huge, just because your Thunder Tusks aren't amazing in combat in the first place. And then Flesh Greed is, again, it's kind of nice, but like you have to stay in combat. It is at the start of each hero phase, which is pretty nice. But yeah, I would definitely go Rime Frost Tide first pick.
If Matriarch wasn't tied to Thunder Tusk and it was just add +1 to charge rolls for Thunder Tusk and Stonehorn, I think I'd be much more of a fan. But if I'm running Thunder Tusks, I really just have 1. Like I don't see a world where I run multiple Thunder Tusks.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you go into the sub faction, which is Thunder Tusky, like that's your super exception.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but they're not in a good spot. Who knows? Maybe Dawnbringers 5 is about the Thunder Tusks and the rise of a Thunder Tusk champion who, I don't know, did some training deep in the mountain with Kragnos. I don't know. Do you find yourself in a world where Nullstone Adornments are used often? Now, obviously, you could build an army based around priests in the Beastclaw Raiders side a bit better. But given that you use butchers and slaughtermasters and things like that, does this come up often at all for you?
Not particularly. I really like the utility that having spells gives you. Like the Firebelly has a great utility spell. All of the gut magic spells are great utility. And then I actually even like running Arcane Tome on the Stonehorn so he can give himself Mystic Shield. That's super nice too. So I usually don't see these, but certainly if you were running like a 100% Beastclaw Raiders monster truck list, I could see, these are pretty good. Just having an Unbind in your list all the time is pretty nice. So yeah. The only thing though is that there is the caveat where you can't have an artifact and this on the same thing. So that becomes a little bit rough, but yeah.
Tell me more. Like, what does that mean?
Well, because like you have one big, let's say you have like something that has the Seed of Alvigor. Now you can't have this on it as well. And because with a Monster Trucks list, you usually have like 1 or 2 Stonehorns, I think, and then a bunch of Stonehorn Beast Riders. So you might have trouble fitting this into one of those lists. So
yeah. And the other point that you made, I just want to reinforce is, would I take an Nullstone Adornment over Arcane Tome? The answer is no. The answer is no. Now, if you have multiple artifacts like Seat and you also have something else and you happen to have a hero who can take it and you have no wizards, awesome. But to me, I think we've probably spent too much time on this, and probably, if I'm making a fair assumption, is Pouch of Null Dust your favorite? If you happen to find yourself in a situation where you have no wizards and you have the heroes to allocate it, is this your favorite, or do you like the other two?
No, I'd prefer to have the hand-carved Nullstone icon, probably. Just for the potential of like unlimited endbinds, it's pretty nice. Because Pouch of Null Dust is actually pretty unlikely to happen, because it has to be an unmodified casting rule that includes a double 1, a double 2, or double 3. So that means not using primal dice, which add modifiers. So it's a little, yeah, it's a little iffy.
Yep, no, I know for like Pouch of Null Dust, people like to have it up their sleeve for that one turn that people are setting up for the Blizzard. They can drop the Pouch of Null Dust because now it makes it even more of a risk. Yeah, you can obviously get around it in some cases, but you roll a double 1, double 2, or double 3 in an initial roll, and that can hurt. But again, would I take a Nullstone Adornment? Only if my list really happened to be one.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not building a strategy around Nullstone Adornments. Certainly not in Ogres.
Yep.
You talk spell laws. Let's talk the 3 popular choices, or the 3 Generals Handbook. I wouldn't say popular. Certainly not for Rupture anyway. Some of them are popular. Let's talk Rupture. Are you taking it? Is this a spell that you would consider? I'm not seeing a lot of Cronspines. Ironically enough, I saw one yesterday at my RTT, but that was also in a Nighthaunt list for lols. But outside of that, like, there's not a lot of Cronspines running around right now. So assuming there is no Cronspine attached to a Dawnbringers book in the future, do you see value right now taking this as a spell choice?
No, not right now. It's it doesn't really have any use in it, and it certainly doesn't beat out any of the other options that you have available to you too. So definitely wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about predatory endless spells at the moment. And if Cronspines either get a point decrease in December, January, or a new Cronspine comes out, then maybe revisit Rupture. But right now, I think we're okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What about Blizzard?
Blizzard is an interesting one. Extremely useful in a lot of armies that just have extra casters laying around. I no longer use Blizzard in my Ogres army. Like, if I had the option to just like also additionally have Blizzard, I definitely wouldn't say no. But just based on what's available to me, I don't particularly get a lot of use out of it. And I actually did run Blizzard for the first like 3 or 4 tournaments of this GHB, and I don't think I successfully casted it once in any of my games. And the reason for that is because Ogres don't, or at least the way that I run them, don't particularly have a lot of good access to like getting more primal dice than your opponent. So what you end up doing is you just end up getting into a hard roll off with your opponent. So it's like, okay, effectively a 50-50, or even worse if they have bonuses to casting. And primal dice definitely favor unbinding as opposed to like actually casting a spell, because you can't primal miscast on an unbind. So it's really good. But I think that having access to Hoarfrost is more important than putting a Blizzard in your list.
And that's why I did that order, because I really like Blizzard. I've reconsidered keeping Blizzard in my list. The difference and why I'm keeping it is because I'm playing Gits at the moment, maybe switching back to Gargans. But my Gits have 60 point, 70 point Wizards. So the trade-off and the cost allocation is minimal. And it's very easy for me to go to Antorian Acolytes Battalion. But with you, as we talked earlier, for you to go Antorian Acolytes, it's 2 Wizards, which would be just under 300 points. It means you wouldn't be 1 drop. You know, is the trade-offs actually there?
Yeah, exactly. And Ogres really like being 1 drop. So it's definitely a hard trade-off.
Cool.
And then for Hoarfrost, go ahead, sorry.
Yep. No, I was just going to say, we're going to take a short break in a second. I need to go just sort out the dog in a minute. But in the meantime, let's just close off with Hoarfrost, and then we'll take a short break in a second. Hoarfrost, great spell, casting value of 8. We all know it. You talked earlier about this being your favorite spell. Tell me more, and then tell me where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is that it has a lot of really good options for where it can go. So in my list, I run Gluttons, I run Iron Guts, and I run a Stonehorn. All 3 of those are great targets for it. For all 3 of them, like if you roll a 1, then you can make them 1+ to hit or 1+ to wound. If you roll a 2, Ren 2 might be decent, or even if I roll a 2 and I'm using it on a Stonehorn, like making the Rock Hard Horns hit on a 2+ natively is extremely good. And then if I roll a 3, like Ren 3 is fantastic. If I have Gluttons rolling around at Ren 3, that's amazing. And all 3 of them have like a pretty decent use case for each option. So like Iron Guts, they're already Ren 2, so if I roll a 2, I just make them 2 up to wound. If I roll a 3, maybe I make them Ren 3, or actually I would make them Ren 3 in that case, yeah. And then the same thing with Gluttons, the same calculation happens. And then the Stonehorn, even on a 1, 2, or 3, I would probably still just put it on the hit roll for Rock Hard Horns. So it's super nice. That's one of the things that Ogres can struggle with, or specifically the Stonehorn, is that it has troubles with hitting things with its most valuable profile. So the more you can stack the odds in your favor there, the better.
Yeah, like I'm looking at the profile, and there's a lot of like wound characteristics of 3, so you can get that down to 2 if you already have a 3 to hit. You just issue all that attack and 2s and 2s. If you need the rend, I guess you could spike with a little higher rend.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that this plays pretty well with the Slaughtermaster's Pot, where you can resolve the Slaughtermaster's Pot first, which effectively, if you roll a 3 or a 4 in your hero phase, you can give something +1 to wound anyway. So if you really want to stack something up, you could say like, I'm gonna give these Iron Guts +1 to wound because I know they're gonna get into combat this turn. Then if I cast Hoarfrost on a 1 or a 2, you can just do it to their hit roll and save them a CP, or a 3, you can make them rend 3, and then all of a sudden it's 2s, rend 3, 3 damage, which is, crazy. There's a benefit no matter what you roll.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the War Scroll of the Gluttons again, and they've got 4 attacks if you do the paired clubs, or 3 if it's the regular club. 3s, rend 1 for 2. If you put that to rend 3, or if you put that down to wound characteristic of 2, 2s, either rend 1. Like that's a lot of attacks from the humble old glutton.
Yeah, a glutton unit, a minimum size glutton unit has a damage potential of 50. And if you have that on rend 3, it's crazy. It's already pretty reliably getting through on 3s and 3s, but yeah, if you manage to get it down to 2s and 2s, it's even better. And the nice thing is you can kind of pick what you want to do based on your opponent. Like if I'm going against OBR, maybe I do want rend 2 or rend 3. But if I'm going against something that has a low save already, then definitely just guaranteeing that the damage gets through in the first place is the priority. So
while we're talking gluttons for a hot second, have you found the coherency changes, given that this unit size is 6, do you find that the coherency changes has made much of a difference with gluttons?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Congo lines all day. We're running Congo lines of ogres down the entire battlefield. I do that a lot. So, and my dog agrees apparently. But yeah, it's been amazing.
Yeah, that's a really beneficial thing for you. Like I was looking at it going, oh yeah, unit 6. Like there's because you do have like your Yetis are units of 3. So again, that would benefit. Your lead belchers are units of 4, so that's not as beneficial. And same as the iron guts, they're in that weird unit of 4. But I guess when they start dying, you start to benefit.
Yep.
All right. On that note, we're going to take a short break. It won't actually seem like a break to all you people in Futureland watching this after it's edited. But we're back in a second. We'll talk about the other spells. All right, we're back from break, and now we got the other spells to talk about. So we've talked about Blizzard, and it's good. Hoarfrost, really good for us. Is it better than the spells natively in the book? And are we looking at something like Warlord or Command Entourage to get us 2 spell choices? And do we go, Blood Feast and Hoarfrost? Or, how are we thinking of the spells? So let's go through I don't know, what are the spells that you prefer? And are they better than what we just talked about, Blizzard, Hoarfrost, yada?
Yeah, each of these actually has one really good use. None of them are strictly better than the others. So I guess just kind of like going down the list, like Blood Feast is extremely valuable. It adds another damage potential of 12 to a unit of Gluttons. It adds another damage potential of also 12 to a unit of Iron Guts, but at higher rend. Blubbergrub Stench is really good because sometimes if you want to do the Avalanche of Flesh battle trait or battle tactic, you're doing mortals on 3-ups if you charge with your Iron Blaster in a Meat Fist because it's a monster and it gets +1 for being Gutbusters. Molten Entrails is really nice if you know you're going to be just like whipping your Stonehorn in there. Like dealing 5 flat damage with Rock Hard Horns is nuts. And then Greasy Deluge is pretty good, just picking something and giving it -1 to hit. It's a solid debuff if you have nothing else to do. So all of these are really solid, which is kind of why I've landed on taking the Gastromancer command trait to have access to all of them, and then just picking Hoarfrost. To be honest, if I was going to be running a Warlord battalion, I'd probably just pick an extra artifact and then take the what's it called, Gruesome Trophy Rack instead of an extra spell, just because everything being +1 to hit is also extremely valuable against monsters and heroes specifically, but still.
The Greasy Deluge I really like because it seems underwhelming at first, like -1 to hit. So what? I'll just use a command ability too. But it's spending a resource to get somebody back to where they started. It means they can't get any higher. So they, very rarely are they going to be able to get a +2 to hit. In obviously, there's some situations where you can, but in most cases, they're spending a resource just to hit on base values. So I really like that, and having a really high range as well of 18 is one of the reasons it's one of my favorites, and it's missile and melee. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think out of all of these, the only one that actually targets an enemy unit. So if you are going against like Null Myriad or Corn or something, maybe it's one that you don't want to use, but it's definitely really useful against other armies that, especially if they already struggle with hitting, that -1 to hit can be really devastating. Yeah.
What about your fire bellies? Now we've talked. This is the season for fire bellies, and I'm really happy that it's finally here.
Yeah, I mean, I take the fire belly literally just to get access to this spell lore. So I pay 120 point tax for Billowing Ash, essentially. In an army that already kind of struggles with being a little bit, not tanky. Having -1 to hit is really good. If you have a butcher that casts Greasy Deluge on something and you have a fire belly at Billowing Ash, all of a sudden you're preventing your opponent's ability to just spend a CP to counteract the -1. So that's really devastating. The other two spells are pretty decent, but if you're only picking one, you're picking Billowing Ash every time, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. When I read Billowing Ash for the first time, it reminded me of my Gobapalooza bubble and how annoying that can be, because 12 inches is a generous base size, and you'll take up at least a section of the battlefield just, with that range. Tongues of Flame isn't too bad. But yeah, Billowing Ash, number one, that little debuff bubble can protect your lead belchers. It could be going along with your gluttons or your iron guts, or there's a lot of things you could do with it, actually.
You can protect your nobblers too. If someone's like, oh, those are just nobblers, I'll clear them out and then, go in and kill the squishy stuff after. All of a sudden those nobblers are -1 to hit, and you might not kill the whole unit, which is extremely annoying actually for an opponent.
Well, with your underguts, as you said, you put what's the artifact that it's a command trait that makes them battle shock immune, right?
Yep.
You have the billowing, you have the Billowing Ash to make it harder to kill them. You're making them battle shock immune. They've probably received an Unleash Hell as well as the traps as you've gotten into them. It's a solid castle, and your opponent's just like, look, I don't want to deal with this. Like, just how about no?
Yeah, it's a solid castle that every single thing inside of it like slaps extremely hard. So you're like, I don't want to go anywhere near that. That sounds terrible. Like I'm not going to be able to hurt it very bad, and then when it hits me back, it's going to hurt really badly. Like it catches a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, people, when I play, again, I keep referring to my gits. When I play with my stabbers and people charge a unit of 20 stabbers, that -1 to hit on the stabbers really increases their durability, and people underestimate what it takes to actually bring down a unit of 20. And I just have that CP up my sleeve. You obviously don't need it if you build around it. So good call. I really like it.
Yep, absolutely.
If you were going to take a priest, let's throw a dog a bone. What prayer are you taking?
I would take probably Keening Gale. Just to like make sure that your stuff actually gets in. Pulverizing Hailstorm is pretty good too. And I would almost never take Call of the Blizzard. Yeah.
So you do Keening Gale, make your Frostlord on Stoneholder priest, then give it that +3 move, and just run up the board and smash.
Yeah. The Splashing Mortal Wounds is pretty good too, like from Pulverizing Hailstorm. 18 inches is a really long range. So yeah, that's a really solid option too. It definitely depends on what you're building in your list. Honestly, Keening Gale is really good for the like Thunderbellies list too, if you ever want to actually try and spec into Mournfang, just because they do move a little bit slower than Frostlords, so giving them +3 and run and charge is all of a sudden enough to like get them across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, like your dog was asking about Call of the Blizzard, and like, to be honest, dog, I don't think like it's a good spell. Like I don't see a world where I'm building into Frost Sabers, although Yetis have their play if you really want to build into Yetis. But again, like it's probably my third choice of the three. Like I probably see more value in Keening Gale and Pulverizing Hailstorm out of the three.
Yeah, exactly. I think Icefall Yetis are kind of in the same camp as Man-Eaters for me, where it's like they seem cool. I would really like them for them to be cool, but the model is just, it's really old at this point. It's resin. Like I don't want to spend a bunch of money like getting into them, and they're not great at the moment anyway. So next battle tome, hopefully.
I think if there's much more native synergy, and I think that's the challenge, right? Like whether you're doing Gutbusters or Beast Claw Raiders, if you look at things like Man-Eaters, or you look at things like your Yetis, even Gorgers, like is there a Gorger hero? Is there other synergies that build around them? Not really. They're independent pieces. They do a thing, but you can't easily build around them. And that's probably what's missing. You add a Yeti monster or a Yeti hero, that changes the conversation a little bit. You add a Man-Eater, like I don't know, something that they can build around, changes the value.
Absolutely.
Yeah, give me a Yeti monster. Like, give me like a super Yeti. Give me a super Yeti. I'm down for a super Yeti. Guaranteed sale from me. Where's your grand strategies at? Are you picking something from the book, or are you picking something from the General's Handbook?
I'm doing Ready for Plunder every time. It's the Ogors, take what's theirs, basically. Like Ogre player, I mean, if you're running Underguts, I probably wouldn't take that one. But if you're running Beast Claw Raiders, you're going to want to be just launching yourself at your opponent. If you're running Gutbusters, you're going to want to be doing the same thing. Like, this is effectively, it's a win more strategy for sure. Like, if you have dealt with your opponent pretty well, this is one that you're almost guaranteed to get. So that's usually what I take. I can see some arguments for Spellcasting Savant or maybe Overshadow if you're running Gutbusters, because you have a lot of battle line in that case. But yeah, I'm always ready for Plunder.
What about enough grub for all? Because on paper, that seems like it's an easy one to achieve. Got a more pot, spend it, fill it again, win. Like on paper, that sounds easy to achieve.
Yeah, but as soon as your opponent knows that, all of a sudden they just say, okay, I'm just never going within 6 inches of your pot. And then it's a very easily interactable strategy, unfortunately. And also, it's one of the grand strategies that actually counteracts what you want to be doing with the army, which is you want to be going way in your opponent's face. And chances are, if they're coming to you that close, something's kind of gone wrong. So it's not going to be, if things are going really well for you, it's not really possible to score.
I'd like to see this in a future update where, for example, in Sylvaneth, you can extend the range of strike and fade by 3 inches in a sub faction. I'd love an ability to be able to unlock that, because that's 6 inches. You can play around it. And that's why I was saying to you before, I don't find a lot of value in the Mawpot. I mean, obviously the +1 to cast Unbind Dispel is valuable, but like once you've spent the pot, you don't really refill it very often. It's super unlikely. But if you could extend that somehow through a spell, extend it through a sub faction, I think it brings a lot more to the party, and things like this become a better choice.
Yep, absolutely.
But Ready for Plunder, I would tend to agree with you. Spellcasting Savant, yeah, very, very possible. I guess it's a little bit harder to bodyguard and protect your wizards, right? Because you do have a little bit more wounds. They don't natively have wards. It's a bit harder to screen because your bodies are going into combat. So you just got to really protect that Entorian Locust General.
Yeah, and there's been games where I've lost both of my wizards and literally nobody else. And just absolutely like tabled my opponent, but it just so happened that I lost my Firebelly and my Slaughtermaster, so that can happen. Whereas with Ready for Plunder, it's like if you win hard against someone, like you're getting it. No question.
And that's kind of outside of, as you said, the underguts. This is what you want to do anyway. Like this is complementing your play style very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. What about battle tactics? Because this is something that continues to come up with various people, because the battle tactics in general are a little harder than previous seasons. And even my first battle tactic in the battle round it's a lot harder again than previous. How do you think about battle tactics, and are there ones that you use more than others?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime that I can, I'm going to try for Magical Dominance turn 1. Like, that's going to be, I guess, just like going through the GHB battle tactics first. You can actually score almost all of them with ogres. It's very reactionary though. So like a big thing that determines what you're going to be doing first turn, for instance, is going to be what is the battle plan that you're playing. And if you're playing on a battle plan that has no man's land and you're able to intimidate the invaders very easily, all of a sudden you don't have to take the first turn, or you don't have to do something. There's options, right? And you can kind of react to what your opponent does after that. But depending on what your opponent takes, like if you know that they can't really capitalize on a double turn against you, just taking the first turn and doing magical dominance is always a really good option. Just like backboarding your casters essentially and doing that. So usually though, first turn I'm going to be doing either like intimidate the invaders or magical dominance. Second turn, depending on what happens, you could be doing bait and trap. Led into the maelstrom is a really good one. Yeah, or one of the ones that I didn't do the previous turn. The only thing to keep in mind about magical dominance is, and this applies to all armies, is that, and my dog agrees, is that you really only have one shot at this most of the time. Unless you like absolutely table your opponent and they have no means of actually dispelling something, chances are you're only going to be able to get a shot at this one time, which is like the very first turn of the game. Otherwise, they're going to have wizards in range, and then you're in danger of it being unbound, which kind of sucks.
It's turn 1 or turn 5, really. Like,
yeah,
it's either there's no wizards on the table and you cast it freely at the end, or you set it up turn 1 outside of 12, so outside of 30. You have the Mawpot, not the Mawpit. Actually, if you take the Mawpit, does that change the likelihood or the reasoning for taking magical dominance in the first turn?
It does affect it a lot. There's like that +1 doesn't seem crazy, but you know, a 4 instead of a 5 on Mystic Shield, or a 5 instead of a 6 on Billowing Ash it's pretty big. Like it's, you know, a significant increase in likelihood that it's going to happen. So that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of a little bit torn about it, is because I actually tend to take magical dominance first turn a lot. And even if I'm not taking the first turn, I'll usually deploy in such a way that like I'll have my Slaughtermaster and my Firebelly like absolute back of board, and then the Stonehorn is within 12 of them to benefit from any buffs and Mystic Shield and whatnot, but like as far forward as possible. So I'm basically like calling my opponent's bluff by saying, you can put a wizard within 30 of these two guys, but he's going to be within 18 inches of a Stonehorn, probably, right? And then all of a sudden the Stonehorn is a threat that they have to deal with if they want to put their wizards that close. So it's kind of it's a gamble for them. Yeah.
No, I like it. I like it a lot. And it's actually a really good call out in regards to if you are thinking of switching from the pot to the pit, you know, how reliant are you on that +1 to cast, dispel and unbind? Does that put more pressure on your primal magic dice? Because if you hit the 4 and you needed a 5 to get it off, and you definitely need your battle tactic, are you looking for arcane terrain? Are you now having to use a primal magic dice just to get up? And what's the impacts of you trying to unbind your opponent with one less dice? So there's a flow-on effect that's worth considering, at least before you switch out pot for pit or pit for pot.
Yep, exactly. And then kind of going into the ogre battle tactics, there's some really good ones here. Like eat your fill is a little bit dicey because maybe you can't get everything that you have into combat. That's typically like a turns 3 to 5 one, in my opinion, where it's like the battle has really progressed. You want to be in combat with everything anyway. So you're just like charging everything in. Now the unfortunate thing is that trampling charge can actually prevent your ability to score this battle tactic, because it says at the beginning of the combat phase. So you can kill somebody too hard in the charge phase and fail your battle tactic, which I've definitely done. Savor the Taste is an amazing option for turn 2, because effectively it means like, okay, if you've solved your turn 1 battle tactic, you know, you did magical dominance or intimidate the invaders or something, and there's some reason why you really don't want to get anywhere near your opponent, you can basically just stay as far back as possible, play really cagey, and then wait for like another strike later. And then no ogres are in combat is like a very easy thing to score at the end of the turn. Or if you know that you're going to overkill something so hard that that no ogres are going to be in combat at the end of the turn anyway, you can also take Savor the Taste. Like if you have one squig in combat with a Stonehorn, then you're like, yeah, I'm comfortable taking this battle tactic this time. Like it's gonna be fine. Avalanche of Flesh is that's like a turn 2 or 3 tactic only, in my opinion, just because you kind of have to have at least 4 units that are doing trampling charge mortals on a 4-up to like really feel safe about taking this tactic. And even then, it's kind of at the mercy of the dice. So most of the time, you're either going to be out of range turn 1 to be able to do that, or later in the game, you're not going to have enough units to actually satisfy that. Winter take thee, almost never going to happen. Like I've never been able to score this one. That just, yeah, it has to be like a really specific situation of like, it's turn 5 and your Stonehorn's in combat with the hero that has like 1 wound left or something, and you have literally no other battle tactics to score. That's when you would take that.
Challenge as well is like heroic recovery comes in. So you pick your battle tactic and then you go into heroic actions. And if you pick that enemy hero, well, I mean, monster can't do it, but enemy hero is going to choose the heroic recovery. So unless they're unlucky, you really need to spike that one.
Well, I mean, they can't heroic recovery if you're in combat with them, which is like the proc for Grasp of the Everwinter. But any beginning of the hero phase heals are going to be a problem for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like, because of the way that the Grasp of the Everwinter triggers, which is, obviously based on the battle round, you would likely see this come out turn 4 to turn 5, as opposed to putting your gut on a turn 2 roll of a 1. Yeah, it's a risky play.
Yeah. And then Let Them Loose is going to be almost autocomplete if you're running monster trucks, and almost impossible if you're running Gutbusters. And then Boil Their Bones is another one of those that's just kind of like, it depends on if your opponent interacts with it or not. Like if they willingly put a monster or hero within 6 inches of your Maw pot and you've already spent it, definitely go for it. Like it's worth a shot. The only thing I would say is be careful about redeploys. Like there have been times where something has been within 6 inches and I'm like, haha, I'm going to do this battle tactic. And then I run near them and they're like, okay, steps 2 inches this way. And suddenly they're outside. And I'm just like, oh, my plans. How could you?
There's been so many times where it's like, don't move and just try to go for the longer charge, because otherwise if they roll that redeploy, they're out of that range, or you've made the charge even harder. So it's a good call. It's a really good call. Like that's just an easy, if the situation occurs, that's a really good call. Interesting. So turn 1, you're thinking about surround, destroy, intimidate, and/or magical dominance. I guess it depends on your build and depends on how you're thinking. But it sounds like it looks like you got a lot of really good battle tactics to choose from.
Yeah. Realistically, you have 3 options turn 1, which is magical dominance if you're not in range of anything, intimidate the invaders if you're on a no man's land map, or let into the maelstrom is also possible if, let's say, you opt to go second, or you're forced to go second, or something like that, and your opponent is playing a particularly aggressive army, and you can guarantee, okay, the Stonehorn will definitely charge, and then one of my battle line units will definitely charge as well. That's one that's pretty easy to get. And then really, whenever you're going second on the first battle round, it's purely reactionary. So like if your opponent is like a very alpha strike army, you're like, I'm not going to have any problem scoring like Avalanche of Flesh, Bait and Trap, Led into the Maelstrom, something like that. So you can feel pretty safe about your turn 1 battle tactic. But if not, then you might want to consider going first and just taking magical dominance.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good call. Just be mindful of any heroes that can turn themselves into a wizard with the heroic action. But good call, especially if you have the more pit. But probably look for arcane terrain and hope for the best.
Yep.
So with all of this in mind, and we've done a pretty deep discussion so far without going into individual units, but we've kind of called out our favorites and what we like. And like one thing I was thinking about is there might be a use case of frost sabers, even if you're not taking the Icebrow Hunter. Take a unit of one to 2 units of frost sabers could be a great way to do surround, destroy, and even bait and trap. They might be units that you'd want to charge a retreat from a charge, or even maybe to charge into another unit that's retreated. They can't take a hit very well, so you've obviously got to make sure that when they are in combat, they take minimal damage, but they can unlock a couple of battle tactics for you quite nicely too.
Yeah, absolutely. And like different matchups will unlock, different battle tactics really well for you. Like one thing I've discovered is if you play against Corn, bait and trap is actually really nice. Is like calling your opponent's bluff. If they put something just in Murderlust range, and you're like, I'm doing bait and trap, and they know that their choices are basically to either block your units in combat or deny you a battle tactic. All of a sudden, that's a decision that your opponent has to make, and it could be worth losing 2 victory points to make them like reconsider something like that.
So with all this in mind, let's actually look at some of Carson's lists. So this is the first list, and we did talk about Armies of Renown not being as competitive maybe as a traditional build, but here's an example of where you might this is kind of like some ideas around how we would make it the most of the Roving Maw army. So it is spellcasting savant and Indomitable, sorry. You have a Slaughter Master, which is the general. Prime Gut Server. Artifact is the gruesome trophy. No, that can't be
that's
right.
Wrong. Sorry. It's the Roving Maw thing. I think I forgot to
all good.
It's not actually in the app yet, so I forgot to change it.
All good. Yes, it's not in the app yet, so list building is difficult. I'll edit this in post-production. Don't worry about that. The artifact was, Carson, what was it?
It is the flask of meat something from the Roving Maw. Yeah.
Cool. So it's a Roving Maw artifact, no problem. We also have the Merciless Blizzard. List building when the apps aren't updated is very tough. So you didn't win a GT with this, so I don't. Anyway, we got a Butcher with Tenderizer Blizzard. We have a Butcher with Tenderizer Blizzard. We have a unit of Noblars, 4 units of Noblars, 3 units of Gorger Mawpacks, 2 Iron Blasters, and the Mawpit, wrapped up in a Vanguard and an Entorian Acolyte Battalion at 1960 points. So what's this list do? How does it work? And what are you trying to do under a Roving Maw army?
Yeah, so this is very much so a don't come near me, I bite kind of list. So as we talked about earlier in the show, your Noblars are going to be actually doing Gobbling Bites as well. So D3 plus 1 mortal wounds. The Noblars are already really dangerous to come near. And then basically what the Iron Blasters are doing are just providing like a ranged threat for your opponent to have to deal with at some point, just because again 39-inch threat range, like damage potential of 12 each from that range, which is pretty crazy at Ren 2, becomes pretty scary to deal with. And then having Blizzard on everything, the Butcher's War Scroll spell, for anyone that doesn't know, is also an 18-inch range like chomp. Like basically if you cast it, you deal D3 mortal wounds, you roll a 4 up, you deal another D3 mortal wounds, and you just keep going until you don't roll a 4 up. Which is really fun and thematic. So this is basically just like, if you come near me, I'm going to be doing a crap ton of mortal wounds to you. It's not necessarily, again, going to 5-0 anything. I just thought it was fun, like putting 80 Noblars on the battlefield. These Gorgers are just dropping down left and right, like charging into the back line. If you come anywhere near me, I'm going to be like blizzarding you and doing the Voracious Maw from the Butcher. I just think it would be a lot of fun. And I think your opponent would probably have a lot of fun too.
How are you thinking about this on the table? Is this just a traditional advance up the board using Noblars as screens and just general harassing on objectives? Any thoughts around how this actually would play out?
This would certainly be a castle army. So this would be one where I would probably put the Mawpit in my territory. The Slaughtermaster's just sitting inside of it. Huge pillow of Noblars on the outside as the Iron Blasters just kind of pick things off that I need them to. And then Gorgers would be coming down, securing objectives as needed, or, maybe they're just hitting stuff in the back line. Like, it's very utility-esque in that sense. So, yeah.
Cool. No, I like it.
Again, I don't think it's going to 5-0, but I think it'd be fun. Yeah.
Again, considering some of the restrictions you have in list building, it does seem like fun, and it does seem like you got plenty of bodies on the board. You've got a little bit of shooting. You've got a little bit of combat. You've got the wizards on the board, and obviously having Blizzard is going to help with the damage output. You've got a lot of chip damage here and there. Obviously the Iron Blasters have some great range. I dig it, and we will make the artifact is changed post-production. One of the benefits of not doing live content anymore is now I can fix up my mistakes, and it looks like we didn't make any mistakes.
Not at all.
What are you talking about? There's no mistakes here. The other list is a meat fist list. You've gone ready for plunder. You've gone triumph as inspired. You have a fire belly with the billowing ash. You frostlord on Stonehorn with arcane tome and the rock mane elder. You've got yourself a Slaughtermaster who's the general with the Gastromancer and Hoarfrost as a spell. You've got a unit of Iron Gluttons. Sorry, Iron Gluttons. Where did iron come from? Ogre Gluttons. I was getting a little bit too far ahead of myself. There is also 2 units of Iron Guts. You've got another unit of Iron Gluttons. Why am I calling them Iron Gluttons? You've got 2 units of Gluttons, 2 units of Iron Guts, a Iron Blaster. This is like corn where it's like blood everything or skull everything. You've got a unit of Noblars and an Iron Blaster. I haven't said it already. So that's a 2,000 point nose on the dot kind of list with a battle regiment. So is that a 1 drop? Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, it's a 1 drop. Yep, everything's asterisk, so it's a 1 drop. So how does this list differ? And is this something that you've been running at GTs? And I guess how does it work?
Yeah, I can talk through all of that. So this list, I've been basically modifying it for the past 6 months, maybe 7 months. I kind of ran something similar-ish to this in the first 2,000 point tournament I went to back in March, I think, Cake or Death. That was before the GHB, and then just ever since I've just been like tweaking little things here and there. Tacoma also brought something similar to this, where instead of a Slaughtermaster, it was a Butcher. I was running Shaman of the Chilled Lands instead, and that was really it. Aside from that, yeah, I've just been like slowly tweaking it. It's 2,000 points on the nose, so like the triumph isn't actually relevant, like you said, and it makes me very anxious about the next battle scroll. How it works is basically, I'm kind of the type of player that I don't like not interacting with my opponent anytime ever. So at any point, like if it's their hero phase, I can do dispelling. If it's the shooting phase, I can hit you with the Iron Blaster. I could be charging you. I could be hitting you in combat. Like this list is basically designed to be like pure utility, and also like, making sure that my opponent never feels safe, if that makes sense. So it's like, sure, you can stay really far away from me, and my Foot Ogres can't really get near you, but the Iron Blaster is just going to be taking chunks out of something every turn, and the Stonehorn is going to be able to get to you pretty easily too. This has done really well for me. Like I've 5-0'd with this list a couple times. Definitely won best overall a bunch of times too. Like at Tacoma, I came 6th, as you said before. So it's just been really nice. Everything in the list essentially is a hammer in some way. Like obviously not the Noblars, but like even when you go near the Noblars, they're hurting you. Like you end within 6, they hurt you. You charge them, they hurt you. You pile into them, they hurt you. Like just lots of stuff like that. And also it allows me to be really reserved. So what I can do is with that Firebelly's Billowing Ash spell of, -1 to hit within 12, I can just pack the entire army into that and slowly move it up the board until I know that, okay, now's the time where I can deal a devastating blow. Things come out of the castle and just absolutely like smack, right? It can be pretty deadly. But a lot of it too is just about like positioning. The Stonehorn moves 14 inches, so he's a very good fast anvil. I can move him up, charge him in, tie up a whole bunch of stuff while the rest of my army kind of advances. And even if that means that the Stonehorn is going to die in a turn or two, it's not the worst thing in the world if my opponent's army does literally nothing for those 2 turns, right? But then there are other games where I want to be really reserved with my Stonehorn. Like maybe I know that he's going to be the counter-strike piece. Purely just all about handling every possible situation that I can. Like this doesn't get countered by anything and it doesn't counter anything, but it does quite well into everything. So
yeah, what I really like about this is there's a lot of independent threats. Like if you take down one of these units, it's not like the rest of your army crumbles. Like you take out a unit of Iron Guts, cool, you've still got many various threats. You lose the Iron Blaster, okay, all right. I mean, sure, it was nice to have it, but you've still got, as you mentioned, the Frostlord and Stonehorn, the Gluttons, the Iron Guts. There's a lot of good value pieces here, and I guess what you've demonstrated, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed in your last 6 months of competitive gaming, is that this list has evolved, but you've kept true. So even while new battle tomes drop and meta shifts and things rise and fall in their power, you've stuck to the play style. And I've always said for years and years and years that it's less about the list. It's more about the micro decisions you're making on the table. It's about being predictable and anticipating and understanding the limitations and the strengths of your army. And by committing and understanding how to handle certain armies, you become a better gamer. So my advice to anyone who's thinking about this is, take this list, run it. But like, just because you lose a game doesn't mean you should gut your list. Like, experienced players will change a unit or two, but like gutting and fundamentally changing a list is usually never the right approach. But it's a solid list. If I was to play you, it's definitely hard to work out where to start. Most people probably look at the Frostlord on Stonehorn and want to target that, which is great for the Iron Guts, because they're like, cool, we're going to get in unwounded because the Frostlord is taking the damage. Put a Finest Hour on it, throw an Arcane Tome, Mystic Shield on it, heal it with the more pot, and you are you're pretty survivable.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of as you were saying before, like playing the same thing and kind of getting used to everything else is a really important thing. Ogres are a very honest army. Like, pretty much what you see is what you get. Like, you look at the War Scroll, you're like, that punches pretty hard, it moves pretty fast, and it doesn't take a whole lot of damage, but it's still good. And because of that, I've been able to really focus on like, okay, how exactly does piling in and combat and charging, like all of this sequencing stuff work? And I don't have to focus on like some crazy machinations of like playing a Zeech army, for instance, where it's like I have to execute my plan perfectly with this army or else it's all gone. With Ogres, it's very forgiving in the sense that like if you get something in, it's going to slap hard, and it kind of allows you to just focus on positioning like really, really well. And yeah, I've had a lot of fun playing it. And actually, a teammate of mine brought this list to the same tournament, or Kipper's Melee actually, and he went 4-1 with it, despite like never really playing Ogres in a tournament before. And he was like, "Cool, this was a lot of fun," and it just takes a lot of load off your mind. You're like, "All right, let's get into it. Let's fight. Yeah, let's do it." Like, you're not really concerned about like that one thing going off or this one unit not dying. So, yeah.
I was talking to a mate the other day about a tournament coming up, and he's like, do I run Iron Jaws with all the piggies or do I run Gargants? And I'm like, look, one of the things I love about Gargants is it's so liberating because I don't care. I don't have teleports. I don't have like all these different various tricks. It's just like, it's very honest. I do what I do really well, and I don't have to think about the mental load of like, all the counter stuff because I can't. I move forward and stay on circles. And as some of my favorite wrestlers would say, this list is no tricks, just fists. And that's what it is. You just get into combat, just punch, bite, claw. And shout out to the Nobblers. I don't think I've ever noticed that the champion in a Nobbler is called a groin biter. I have a new appreciation for Nobblers based purely on the groin biter.
Yeah. Yeah. It's best champion name in the game, in my opinion.
I don't think I've ever noticed that.
Yeah, it's there. And if you run multiple Nobblers, you have multiple groin biters. So have fun with that.
All right, I got some Discord questions for you to kind of bring us home, and then I'll let you do some shout outs and let you go on your merry way. Are you ready for some questions from the peeps?
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to ask this. It's kind of already been answered, but do you have any opinions on a heavy Gorges list? So, like, I know we talked a little earlier about, would you run 2 units of 5 or a unit of 10? But, do you have any thoughts even going further than that? Like, would you, 2 units of 10? Would you go even harder on Gorges?
I don't think so. I think they're definitely a utility piece, as we kind of discussed at the beginning of the show. I personally am going to run like maybe 1 in a game if I do run them at all, and then kind of see where it goes from there. But they're definitely not like a spam it, keep bringing more Gorgers kind of unit. So yeah, I would definitely keep it pretty light touch at the beginning.
Yeah, that question came from Azakura. So yeah, I tend to agree. Like 1 or 2 units probably at most. When I start going in and reinforcing them to be units of 10, that's 440, and that's Frostlord on Stonehorn territory. And I struggle to justify. Yeah, it's more wounds, but the output and the value and the speed, I can't. I personally couldn't justify going any heavier than 2 units of 5, unless obviously you're doing the Roving Maw where they become battle line, and maybe that does change it a little bit more.
Yep.
Now that we've had this entire conversation, are you leaning towards the Mawpit or the old Mawpot coming from 4020? So 42, sorry. 42 is the Discord member.
Yeah, I definitely want to play with the Mawpit. So like in my personal games, I'm going to be using the Mawpit every time just to see how it does. And I think that it has the possibility of being better than the Mawpot every time. But being the way that I am, I need to make sure that that's the right choice before I actually commit to that for a tournament. And with the importance of the tournaments coming up, I'm probably not going to be running it. So because I've got a Masters tournament for the Pacific Northwest coming up, and then immediately after that is the World Championships in Atlanta, where it's like, I don't know if I want to make a change to something that's been working pretty well already, like last minute. That could be a little bit, I could shoot myself in the foot.
No, I think the mental load, you stick to what you've currently got. Kev asking, how do you deal with cheap minimum size unit armies that are roadblocking you?
That's a tough one. The one that comes to mind, and that is Corn, where they're just like, I'm going to put this basically useless unit directly in front of you. You have to deal with it because I'm locking you in combat with it. That's a tough one. And with that one, I would say you kind of have to spread out a little bit. The nice thing is that if you also have lots of minimum size units like Gluttons or Iron Guts, when they make a big charge, they can actually just slip through all of those minimum size units and strike all of them at once. So you really only need like one big hammer swing to kind of get rid of them. And like there's been some games where I play against an opponent that does something like that. I get all of my stuff in, and they're like, "Oh, all of my screens are gone." Like they're all gone in one combat phase. Like I didn't expect that to happen. So it's a pretty easy problem for ogres to deal with as long as you don't clump up too much.
Second question from Kev is, what do you do against deep striking teleport heavy armies? So, I mean, Sylvaneth would definitely be one of those, but they're not definitely, Beast Claw Raiders, not Beast Claw Raiders, Beasts of Chaos would be another. There's obviously many examples of this, but how do you think about those?
That's kind of purely why the Nobblers are there. Is like whenever I'm going into a Sylvaneth list, you can just put your Nobblers in front of your entire front lines as far ahead as you need to, just blocking them from getting any real value. Because it's like, sure, you can go and attack the Nobblers and you can clear them, but then you're spending a turn dealing with a 120 point unit that I effectively want them to die. Like I'm not too worried about that. And then for other deep striking heavy armies, it's really just about punishing your opponent for coming close to you. So when you castle up and you create this like meat blob in the center of the board that you're just slowly moving forward, maybe you've got all of your buffs from the -1 to hit for Billowing Ash, maybe you've got like good counter strike potential. Really the best thing you can do is just weather the storm and then punch them back as hard as you can. So don't spread out too much against armies like that. Like if you're covering the entire board against like Stormcast or Sylvaneth or something like that, chances are things are just going to get picked off one at a time, as opposed to you being able to say, okay, now that you've killed this one unit, I can come back and just destroy whatever you've decided to put there. So yeah.
Maybe my final question is, do you have any advice on trading up with your ogres? Because as we've kind of demonstrated, you don't get a lot of tools in an ogre army. You have to get more value than what you're putting in, right? Those Iron Guts are 240, they can slap, but do they get the most out of their points? And that can be challenging for ogres. Any thoughts or advice on how you trade up and, I guess, kill more, score more than what you've invested in a unit?
Yeah, my biggest tip would probably be to be more reserved than you think you should be as an ogre player. You really, it's like an almost irresistible urge to get as close as you can to your opponent and just charge with everything. But because you really don't have any strike first, you don't have any activation chaining of any kind, it's actually worth it to keep most of your stuff back until you absolutely need it, or you know that it's not going into something that can hit you back really hard. And then another big point would be that's kind of where the the Frost Lord really becomes like extremely useful. Is that if you can pin something down that's really important to your opponent, then it's going to severely reduce their ability to like actually hit the stuff that you want to be trading with. So like protecting your iron guts by basically sacrificing your stone horn for like 2 turns because it's so tough is a big thing.
I'm going to ask you the final question I ask everyone that comes on the channel is, if you had a chance to influence the next Ogre book, is there anything that you would add? And I'm not talking just rules. I could be talking about like a new unit. Like, is there a particular gap you think the Ogres are missing that you'd love to see in the next iteration of Ogor Mawtribes?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that would be nice if they changed up, like the keyword stuff with the Firebelly for sure. Mournfang actually are one thing that kind of suffers from that too. It's like they are Beastclaw Raiders, but they're also like they're
Right, the Rhinox.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're really only ever like doing trampling charge on 5s, which is kind of weird when you think like they have like massive spears on front of them. Like they should be doing way more damage than that. And then the biggest thing I think is just kind of fleshing out some of the older models in the range. So like our Man-Eaters, our Yetis, they've just done the Gorgers, which is awesome. Like that's one resin model that we don't really have to see on the tabletop anymore. So yeah, just fleshing out what we already have, I think, is big, because we actually have a decent amount of options.
I'm going to say something that I'm sure I'm going to cop later on Discord. People are going to just like clip this and throw it in my face forever. Noblar hero. I want a Noblar hero. Make it like 3 Noblars in a trench coat. Make it like a Noblar, you know, like the I don't know if you've seen the Cities of Sigmar range where you've got like a Fusilier on top of an Ogre. Like, give me a Noblar on top of an Ogre, or a Noblar on top of something like a Yeti or whatever. Like, give me a Noblar hero, because you got the scrap launcher, you got the Noblars on foot. Give me like the old Doom, not the Doom wheels, the I can't remember what it's called. They used to like a Snotling pump wagon. Like, give me some more ways to build around Noblars, because they're fun. I love the character. They bring a different build, but right now they just play the role of screen. Like, let me bring another dimension to them. Let them be screens, but let me actually make a viable list out of them too.
Yeah, absolutely. It'd be kind of fun if you could lean into like almost Skaven aspects, where it's just like one of us is going to die today, and it might be me, but we're gonna see what happens, kind of thing. Like, so like the kind of suicidal, like frontline nature of Noblars for sure could be fun to play on. If you do want to scratch the itch of like 3 Noblars in a trench coat, though, I think it's Rothgorn's Man Trappers that they have like 1 Noblar sitting on the shoulders of another, which is just like hitting with a hammer essentially. So that's kind of fun.
I just imagine like the Red Gobbo, but as a Noblar, like just like some weird trench coat, crazy Noblar who somehow has got some form of power and leadership in the Ogres. Make it a named character even, and let it like be the champion of the Noblars. That would get me. That would get me.
It would get me too. But anything new for Ogres gets me, so it's an easy sell.
Carson, if people want to hear more from you, we've already mentioned earlier Saga of Dice on YouTube. They put out regular content, battle reports, AOS chats. So they frequently putting out content, and you are a reoccurring guest, it appears. So if people want to hear more from you, they can come see you, obviously, in the Pacific Northwest. They can see you on Saga of Dice. Are you on the socials at all? Are you hanging out on Discord or Facebook groups? Or if people want to chat to you about Ogres, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. The Saga of Dice Discord is a place that you can easily find me. I don't really have any like Warhammer related social media accounts, so you can't reach me there, unfortunately. But yeah, through any of the Discords, there's a Pacific Northwest Discord, a British Columbia Discord if you're in Canada, like I am. So Discord's probably the best spot.
Cool. So go to Saga of Dice's YouTube channel, go give him a subscribe, and I'm sure Rob in his videos have a link to or you can message Rob, the channel owner, to get that link. So I'll go check them out. Go click the sub while you're there. Carson, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate not only your thoughts, but your dog's thoughts. I think both of you have given us a really good understanding and thought around where Ogres are currently sitting in Generals Handbook. We've had a couple of months of experience. Obviously, the meta is shifting and continuing to evolve. So keep practicing and playing with your Ogres. Hopefully, This is giving you some ideas, some examples. Doesn't mean that you have to take this list and this is the only way to be competitive. It's purely just a example of how a top tier player is thinking about the army currently in the meta. Any shout outs, by the way? Anyone you want to say hello to, or we'll wrap it up? I'm sure you've got some peeps you want to like mad props to.
On the spot, I didn't think about this. No, I mean, yeah, thanks to everyone that's been helping me kind of just get into the hobby. Like, my club has been super inclusive and nice. Everyone in my club is
who's your club?
Warp Dice. Yeah, shout out to all the Warp Dice people. There's a lot of competitive people in there. Like Matthias Crucial is in my club. He's been like fantastic to learn against. Dale Johnson in my club as well. Like, really good Gits and Daughters of Cain player. Both of them have kind of helped shape the player that I am. Rob Johnson, of course, too, the Saga of Dice owner. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more people that I missed, but yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right, I put him on the spot there, so I'm sure if he didn't get acknowledged, it's because he's just under the sheer pressure of excitement of having to talk to about Ogors. Just under 3 hours. You talked Ogors for 2 hours. We've actually talked almost 3 hours. So yeah. I'm sure all the meat lovers of the world have enjoyed this discussion, taken some ideas, some value. Hopefully it kind of helps you take your game to the next level. And I guess, Carson, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Everyone, again, if you're thinking about buying the Long Hunt or any of your hobby supplies, check out my partners, as I mentioned, Warpfire Minis over in the USA or Element Games in the UK. I'm sure I'll get an Australian one in the near future. And don't forget, if you want to talk more Ogres, we do have a Ogre dedicated area in my Discord server, as well as talking, with over 8,000 Age of Sigmar players who really cool cats. I really enjoy my Discord. They are wonderful people, and there's a lot of great discussion going on. But Carson's going to go do his thing. I'm going to go take the dog for a walk, and I hope you all enjoyed this discussion. See you, everyone.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for hanging around until the end. I hope you enjoyed that video and you walked away with a few new ideas. Now, if you did, I would love it if you pressed like on the video, as well as left me a comment with your thoughts. The conversation will continue over on Discord, and the link is down below in the episode description. I also want to give a massive shout out to the AOS Coach patrons and YouTube members who are supporting the channel and the growth that you're seeing here. So cheers, you are all bloody legends. And until next time, don't roll a 1-1 on a spellcast.